The
9,907th meeting of the Security Council is resumed. The provisional agenda for this session is the report of the Secretary General on Sudan and on South Sudan. The agenda is adopted. The Security Council will now begin consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S-2025-211, the report of the Secretary General on the situation in South Sudan. Members of the Council have before them document S-2025-259, the text of a draft resolution submitted by the United States of America. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S-2025-259 please raise their hand?
Le résultat du vote.
The result of the voting is as follows. The draft resolution has received 15 votes in favor. The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 2778-2025.
The
9,908th meeting of the Security Council is resumed. I now give the floor to the representative of Poland.
Monsieur le Président, Excellences, last week the world once again witnessed Russian unwillingness to reach a ceasefire with Ukraine, demonstrated by the launching a massive attack on the regions of Kyiv, Zhytomyr, Dnipro, Kharkiv, Poltava, Khmelnytsky, Sumy, and Zaporizhia, that continued even last night between the two sessions of this very Security Council on a new attack, a drone attack on Dnipro and Kharkiv. Despite many opportunities, Kremlin has only scaled up its attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure. Continuous efforts by the United States and Ukraine to establish a just, comprehensive and lasting peace are met with Russia's neo-colonial demands. Poland, as much as any other country, supports the diplomatic efforts to put an end to the Russian aggression against Ukraine. However, we cannot help but notice that Moscow's involvement in the US-led shuttle diplomacy is increasingly looking like a play to gain the time to secure a better position on the battlefield. Monsieur le Président, Russian war of aggression and its imperialist ambitions remain the greatest threat to peace and stability in my region, the region of Poland and Central Europe, as well as to the UN system based on democracy, human rights and international law. Each day, Russian Federation continues to openly violate UN Charter, showing disdain to jointly agreed rules and above all to human life. This is the reason why we should expand the political and economic pressure on Russia. In order to bring peace and stability, we need a deal that will be comprehensive, just and durable. A deal that does not compromise on Ukraine's ability to defend itself and its sovereign right to determine its future. We should not contend with the temporary truce that Russia can first propose and then breach, as shown during the Easter holiday. In conclusion, we continue to call for holding Russia fully accountable for violation of international law, human rights, war crimes and crime of aggression at both state and individual levels. Supporting the Ukrainian state, fighting with aggressor and providing assistance based on the development and humanitarian needs remain Poland's priority. And I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant permanent de la...
Thank the representative of Poland for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the European Union to the United Nations.
Thank you, Mr. President, Monsieur le Président. The candidate countries, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Georgia, and the EFTA country Liechtenstein, member of the European Economic Area, as well as Andorra, Monaco, and San Marino, align themselves with this statement. I would like to thank the Presidency for scheduling this meeting at a critical time. I also would like to thank DPPA and OCHA for providing a clear assessment of the destruction caused by Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. The time for peace is now, and the EU reiterates its support for a comprehensive, just and lasting peace based on the UN Charter and international law. We welcome all efforts towards reaching peace in line with the UN Charter. Ukraine has demonstrated its readiness to accept a comprehensive and immediate ceasefire without preconditions. Instead of reciprocating, Russia has stepped up its relentless attacks on Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure. We call on Russia to demonstrate a willingness to achieve peace without further delay. There can be no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine, and no negotiations that affect European security without Europe. The EU is ready to continue playing its full part. Regrettably, the past week have provided further evidence of Russia's lack of interest in any ceasefire, with daily attacks and deadly attacks. The Office of the High Commission, the OHCHR, has verified an increase in civilian casualties since the start of the year as a result of Russian attacks. And according to UN human rights monitors, from 1 to 24 April this month, Russian attacks caused 848 civilian casualties, with the deadliest single attack of this year on the city center of Sumy, killing 35 people and wounding 117. Last week, Russia launched what is likely the largest combined drone and ballistic missile attack since 2022 across Ukraine. Russia's campaign of systematic airstrikes against Ukraine's civilians and civilian critical infrastructure violates international humanitarian law and must stop immediately. According to the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission, these attacks have been of a widespread, indiscriminate, and systemic nature. Monsieur le Président, there can be no impunity. Russia and its leadership must be held fully accountable for waging a war of aggression and for other most serious crimes under international law. We commend the efforts of OCHA and its humanitarian partners in providing assistance to those in need. And we take note of OCHA's reprioritized humanitarian needs and response plan, particularly its continued focus on reaching frontline communities. Full, safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access must be facilitated for humanitarian relief to reach all civilians in need, including in areas under temporary Russian occupation. As is the case for all crises around the world, the EU and its member states will continue to contribute generously to the UN's humanitarian response, and we call on all nations to step up their support as well. In closing, Monsieur le Président, I reaffirm the EU's unwavering support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. The EU will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. We need a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in line with the UN Charter, and we need it now. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie la représentante de l'Union européenne.
Thank the representative of the European Union for that statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Germany.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
President, distinguished colleagues, Germany aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. 50 days ago, Ukraine accepted a proposal for a complete and unconditional 30-day ceasefire. Ukraine has renewed this proposal, extending its hand in goodwill to the aggressor, even when Russian attacks on civilian infrastructure continued unabated. In the days following Easter, Russia further escalated its relentless attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. On the 24th of April, Russia launched its most devastating attack of the year on Kyiv and its surrounding regions, bombarding residential areas with missiles and drones, killing and injuring innocent civilians in the heart of Ukraine's capital. A month ago, President Putin openly said that Russia will, and I quote, finish Ukraine off, end of quote, and will achieve all the goals of its so-called, quote, special operation. In an interview published on Monday, Foreign Minister Lavrov once again reiterated that the terms of a peace agreement should provide for the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. In yesterday's statement, the Russian delegation once again reaffirmed these positions, showing a clear disregard for Ukraine's political sovereignty and territorial integrity. Clearly, these are not bona fide gestures in a spirit of rapprochement required by those who seriously want to negotiate peace. Both sides, and most certainly the aggressor, must demonstrate their readiness to work towards a ceasefire. Monsieur le Président, Germany reaffirms once again its steadfast commitment to a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Such a peace must not reward the aggressor. It must not demand the surrender of the victim. We remain firm in our conviction that a peace imposed against the will of the Ukrainian people will not endure. It will serve no one, and it will not serve justice. A future peace agreement must respect the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, as repeatedly affirmed by the General Assembly, most recently on the 24th of February. The principles of the UN Charter, the charter that safeguards all nations, large and small, from aggression, must be protected for the sake of us all. We call on Russia to demonstrate its willingness to achieve peace now and end its attacks immediately and agree to a full and unconditional ceasefire without further delay. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Allemagne.
Representative of Germany for that statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Hungary.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, Hungary thanks the French presidency for organizing today's meeting and giving us the opportunity to speak on such a crucial issue of European peace and stability. We would also like to thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo and ASG Joyce Msuya for their briefings. Hungary remains deeply concerned by the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. As a neighbor to Ukraine, Hungary acutely feels this crisis economically, socially, and morally, and is making every effort to assist tackling the humanitarian challenges that have unfolded. Hungary has spent approximately $285 million on services to refugees and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. To date, almost 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees have crossed the border into Hungary. Faced by these unprecedented challenges, Hungary has been engaged in the largest humanitarian operations in our modern history. We remain committed to fulfilling our international humanitarian obligations, including by providing all registered refugees with equal access to healthcare as well as education. As an example, through a unique initiative, a dual Hungarian-Ukrainian bilingual education center was established in Budapest, which provides both Hungarian and Ukrainian transcript of records to facilitate the reintegration of children in the Ukrainian education system once the war has ended. Mr. President, witnessing the harrowing humanitarian consequences of the war in Ukraine, Hungary has advocated for peace since the outbreak of the war. We condemn in the strongest terms the increasing number of civilian casualties in recent attacks. We must not ignore the tragic loss of innocent life and must act to prevent further suffering. Every moment of delay prolongs the suffering of innocent people, and the rising number of casualties highlights the crucial importance of putting an end to the violence. In order to prevent further bloodshed and destruction as soon as possible, we must support all efforts that aim to establish an immediate ceasefire and initiate meaningful negotiations to create a lasting peace. In this regard, recent developments in global politics have presented a crucial opportunity to put an end to the war. Hungary, therefore, welcomes the peace negotiation initiated by President Trump. Mr. President, in conclusion, we reiterate that our ultimate goal must be to swiftly re-establish European peace and security. Therefore, we urge members of the Security Council and the broader international community to prioritize diplomacy and dialogue over conflict. We must do our utmost to facilitate a rapid and sustainable resolution of the war in Ukraine. It is time to work together and amplify the voices of peace. Hungary calls on the Security Council to act with unity and resolve in the face of this crisis and reiterates its commitment to dialogue, humanitarian support, and to a peaceful future for Europe and beyond. I thank you.
Je remercie la
Representative of Hungary for that statement. There are no more. I see.
Pardon.
I'm sorry, 2 minutes.
Je vois une demande de parole.
I see a request for the floor as a right of reply from the Russian Federation. I give the floor to the Representative of the Russian Federation. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I would like to address certain European delegations. The path that we're taking now and the basis of the reception of Russia, not just as a rival, but as an opponent, but also as an enemy that needs to be strategically defeated, is not only deeply wrong, it also is bringing your countries to the brink of inevitable disaster. Perhaps not right now, but your destructive geopolitical adventures are being paid for by the Ukrainian people. They're paying in blood. But how long will this go on? Stop listening to those who are calling for weakening or subjugating, dividing Russia, either in public or in private. Colleagues, you're not being asked to stop supporting Ukraine. Help them, but not by providing lethal weapons, as you're doing now, but rather to try to find a peaceful solution. Victory can be collective. Victory of common sense over prejudice. Victory of good neighborliness and diplomacy over confrontation and enmity. We're prepared for equitable, mutually respectful dialogue. Are you open to this? It's your choice. Thank you for your attention.
Je remercie la représentante de Russie.
Representative of Russia for that declaration. I see no other names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
La 9900.
The 9,907th meeting of the Security Council is resumed. The representative of the United States has requested the floor to make another statement. Therefore, I give the floor to the United States.
President, the United States would like to respond to comments by the permanent representative of Libya during the open debate yesterday on the Middle East. Since Hamas's egregious terrorist attack on October 7th, 2023, this council has been subjected to constant lies and slanders targeting Israel. Yesterday, however, the council saw a new low. The United States condemns the statement by the permanent representative of Libya, who called the unfortunate and tragic civilian deaths in Gaza a, quote, Holocaust. Mr. President, let us be perfectly clear. There is no event in modern history comparable to the Holocaust perpetrated by Nazi Germany. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism is clear, that any such comparison is anti-Semitic because it trivializes the Holocaust and desecrates the deaths of the over 6 million Jews and millions of others who were systematically murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. Those who deploy such comparisons are perpetuating such anti-Semitism and should not be allowed the dignity of speaking in this council. Unfortunately, the grotesque anti-Semitism is a common feature in this council's proceedings. We all sit and watch each week as representatives of certain member states purposefully avoid sitting next to representatives of the member state of Israel. We hear constant lies targeting Israel, such as blaming Israel for Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket attacks, for example, the one that killed and injured hundreds at Al-Ahli Hospital, and constant demonization of the Jewish state. Too many representatives of member states refuse to acknowledge Hamas's misuse of civilian infrastructure under the nose of the UN, or they also refuse to condemn them for the very terrorist group that they are. Mr. President, in conclusion, this anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias is beneath the dignity of this Council and should be unacceptable anywhere. I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante des...
I thank the representative of the United States for that statement and now give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to briefly take the floor to join those who have raised concerns about certain comments made by the representative of Libya in this chamber yesterday. The evil and brutality of the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews were tragically and systematically murdered by the Nazis, will never be forgotten. It is not appropriate or helpful to draw comparisons between the current situation in Gaza and the crimes of the Holocaust. We urge all delegations to focus their remarks in this Council on constructive solutions that move us closer to achieving lasting peace and security in the Middle East for the benefit of Israelis, Palestinians, and all of those living in the region. Thank you.
Je remercie la
Representative of the United Kingdom for that statement. I will now make another declaration as representative of France.
La France souhaite exercer...
France would like to exercise its right of reply in its national capacity after the remarks made yesterday by the representative of Libya, who called the situation in Gaza, quote, a Holocaust. France holds that there has been only one Holocaust, genocide carried out by the Nazis against the Jewish people and many other groups due to their ethnic origin, sexual orientation, or their political opinions. The memories of the Holocaust and respecting memories of victims is our collective duty. The situation in Gaza is catastrophic. The suffering Palestinians immense, but the memory of the Holocaust and memory of the victims is still all of our duties. I now resume my functions as President of the Council. I'd like to remind speakers to limit their statements to no more than 3 minutes in order to enable the Council to carry out its work expeditiously and allow all those who requested the floor under Article 37 to do so during this session. The flashing light on the microphone will prompt speakers to bring their remarks to a close after 3 minutes. I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Mr. President, we extend our gratitude to you for convening this crucial meeting. We align ourselves with the statement delivered by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Mr. President, Israeli-Palestinian conflict has entered its most severe phase in decades, causing unprecedented human loss, hindering the pursuit of a two-state solution, obstructing the application of international law, and the foundational values of the UN Charter. We gather today amid a grave and escalating human crisis in the Gaza Strip, following Israel's violation of the ceasefire agreement. The relentless Israeli military operations have resulted in a devastating toll on civilians and the civilian infrastructure. This includes destruction of the Turkish-Palestinian Friendship Hospital, which was built by Turkey and operated by local authorities as a cancer treatment facility. The flow of aid, including food, water, medicine, and fuel, remains obstructed and dangerously insufficient. Attacks on UNRWA schools, health clinics, and refugee camps persist. Equally alarming is the developments in the wider region. In the West Bank, in blatant disregard of the Security Council Resolution 2234, Israel continues expansion of the illegal settlements, perpetration of settler violence, forced displacement, and actions aimed at undermining the status of Jerusalem. We reiterate our firm rejection of any efforts to displace or expel Palestinian people from Gaza, West Bank, or East Jerusalem. In Syria, Israel continues with its air and land strikes and incursions into Syrian territory in contradiction with the 1974 Separation of Forces Agreement. In Lebanon, Israel's escalating military presence and continued attacks violate the ceasefire between the two countries and the Security Council Resolution 17001. We strongly condemn these flagrant violations of international law. Mr. President, international community must no longer remain idle in the face of the Israeli provocations and violations. We therefore call for, first, an immediate and sustained ceasefire in Gaza in line with UN resolutions and full implementation of the agreement on the ceasefire and release of hostages and detainees that went into effect on January 19th as brokered by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. Second, unhindered humanitarian access in line with international law and obligations of all parties under the Geneva Conventions and ICJ provisional measures. No food has entered Gaza for nearly 2 months as all main border points remain closed. World Food Programme has announced that its food stocks in Gaza have been depleted. UN agencies and the Secretary General have repeatedly appealed for humanitarian access. United Nations, particularly UNRWA, must be at the forefront of these efforts. We categorically reject Knesset's decision to ban UNRWA. It is our collective political, legal, humanitarian, and moral duty as the international community to support UNRWA until a two-state solution is achieved. Third, support for the reconstruction plan initiated by Egypt in coordination with the Palestinian government and adopted by the League of Arab States and Organization of Islamic Cooperation. We welcome the support already extended by international partners and encourage further assistance. Fourth, a renewed commitment to the two-state solution. As underlined once again at the Antalya ministerial meeting for the implementation of the two-state solution and lasting peace in the Middle East on 11th April, international community must maintain the momentum in the realization of this common goal. Wider international recognition of Palestine and its admission to the UN as a full member are vital steps to that end. We trust that the high-level international conference for the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and implementation of the two-state solution to be convened in New York on June and will be co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France will be instrumental in urgently mobilizing the necessary efforts and resources. Finally, we appeal to this Council to act with urgency, unity, and the moral clarity demanded by this moment. History will harshly judge inaction. We call on the Security Council to utilize all available tools, including enforcement of existing resolutions and the adoption of new ones to address our calls. Meanwhile, international community must fulfill its responsibility by supporting a just and political resolution that ends this prolonged occupation, halts the ongoing violence in the region, and demands accountability for violations of international law. Thank you again.
Je remercie le...
I thank the Permanent Representative of Turkey for his statement. I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. South Africa welcomes the convening of this meeting under the presidency of France, appropriately held at ministerial level. We align ourselves with the statement delivered by the Republic of Uganda on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement. Mr. President, the latest bombardments by Israel are unprecedented in scale, violating international law, including international humanitarian law, overtly targeting humanitarian personnel, hindering humanitarian aid, the denial of basic services, food and water, as a weapon of war, as well as the wanton destruction of Gaza's infrastructure. What is disturbing is that each time we meet, the situation becomes worse, and our words and actions are being ignored by a state that has signed the charter, which we are all bound to. This brutal approach by Israel shows disregard for the successful ceasefire arrangement that saw the most progress regarding the objective of the return of hostages kidnapped by Hamas, acts of terror which South Africa condemned from the onset. This only leads us to believe that Israel's intentions are consistent with the acts of genocide and further grave violation of international law. Mr. President, Israel's continued violation of UN Security Council Resolution 2334 of 2016, and particularly the continued expansion of illegal Israeli settlements, land confiscation, and home demolitions in the West Bank shows further indifference to and active undermining of the legally binding decision of this Council. There must be accountability for all of the atrocities, the ongoing genocide, violation of human rights, and war crimes committed against the Palestinian people. South Africa and several other member states have thus opted to resort to international judicial mechanisms, including at the ICJ and the ICC, to seek justice for the people of Palestine. We wish to also bring to the attention of the member states a document entitled Public Dossier of Openly Available Evidence on the state of Israel's acts of genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza as of 4th February 2025. This document was submitted by South Africa to the President of the Security Council on 28 February 2024. The dossier, with the document number S/2025-130, contains publicly available material collected by South Africa evidencing genocidal conduct by Israel against Palestinians in Gaza. We encourage member states and other interested parties to access and read this report. Mr. President, no one state can be allowed to breach international law and at the same time call on others to abide by it. We must be decisive in our resolve to hold those responsible for the violation of international law accountable without exception. The Council must act now, not only in the interest of international peace and security, but to protect those innocent people most in need at this time when an abominable affront on our collective humanity is unfolding before our eyes. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the Permanent Representative of South Africa for her statement. I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Jordan.
السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, we'd like to express our sincere appreciation to the Friendly Republic of France. We thank France for its commendable presidency of the Security Council this month, and we also would like to thank the distinguished Minister of Foreign Affairs for chairing this session, and we thank the Secretary General of the United Nations for his valuable briefing. Mr. President, the Security Council meets once again at a difficult time where the Israeli aggression continues against Gaza and innocents continue to be killed and their vital infrastructure destroyed. A complete siege continues to be imposed on the Strip in a direct violation of international law and international humanitarian law. The number of war victims since the war started has exceeded 52,000 martyrs, most of them women and children. Meanwhile, more than 2 million Gaza residents are living in harsh conditions as a result of the indiscriminate Israeli shelling of civilians and the collapse of the healthcare system and the spread of famine and disease, which is a clear violation by Israel, the occupying power, a violation of its commitments towards international law and relevant United Nations resolutions and the principles of human rights, as well as the 4 Geneva Conventions. This shows that Israel does not respect the temporary procedure measures that have been issued by the ICJ. Jordan renews the need to arrive at an immediate and lasting ceasefire in Gaza. It stresses the need to lift the inhumane siege off the siege and to put an end to the systemic policy of starving the people of Gaza. We call upon the Security Council to shoulder its responsibilities and to call upon Israel to implement its obligations pertaining to opening the crossings and allowing humanitarian access throughout the Strip without any obstacles. And this includes food, medicine, fuel, as well as shelter requirements in order to meet the basic needs of the population and to alleviate their suffering, and in implementation of relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions, the most recent of which was resolution number 2735.
We stress the importance of implementing the agreement in all its levels, and this agreement was implemented thanks to efforts exerted by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. And we stress the need to continue moving forward in the reconstruction of Gaza in accordance with the Egyptian-Palestinian plan, which is a starting point that can be further developed. This was adopted by Arab and Islamic countries and enjoys widespread international support. Mr. President, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, both of which are occupied, are living through catastrophic and tragic conditions and witnessing a dangerous Israeli escalation that targets the holy city, its residents, and its holy sites, be they Islamic or Christian. We stress that the policies and actions of demolition, of forced eviction, of seizing land, of continuing to raid the campus of Al-Quds Al-Sharif and Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa by extremists in the Israeli government under the protection of the occupying forces are all serious breaches of international law and are rejected attempts to impose a fait accompli and change the existing historic status of the city of Jerusalem, Al-Quds. We also stress here the historic role of the Hashemite guardianship in defending Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem and preserving their Arab identity. We call upon the international community to support the steadfastness of the Palestinian people against the policies of Judaization and Israeli annexation. We renew our call to the Security Council to bind Israel with stopping these aggressions which violate United Nations resolutions and which are causing a further aggravation of the situation in the whole region. Thank you, Mr. President. We stress the extremely important role of the UNRWA in performing its vital services in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, and all areas of operation in accordance with the mandate granted to it by the General Assembly and relevant UN resolutions. We condemn recent Israeli laws adopted by the Knesset, the parliament, which target UNRWA and its programs in the occupied Palestinian territories, and we call upon the international community to give stronger political, legal, and financial support to UNRWA to make sure that it can continue with its humanitarian role that is indispensable. We renew the right of the Palestinian people. We believe in the right of the Palestinian people, the firm one, to return and compensation in accordance with relevant United Nations resolutions. In closing, a just and lasting peace is a strategic option, and it is the only guarantee of the peace and security and stability of the region. And this will only be achieved through the establishment of an independent Palestinian state that enjoys sovereignty within the 4 June 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, based on the two-state solution and the Arab Peace Initiative. All efforts must be unified immediately to arrive at an immediate ceasefire and to ensure unhindered humanitarian access and to expand the political horizons so that they would lead to a comprehensive peace based on the two-state solution. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Jordan for his statement, and I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Tunisia.
السيد الرئيس أشكر السيد الأمين.
Mr. President, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his valuable and responsible briefing on the situation. It reaffirms the danger facing the Palestinian people that it is facing throughout its territory and its implications for peace and security in the region and the world. We must not forget that the occupation of Palestinian territories did not begin in 2023, and that the historical reasons for this occupation are well known to everyone. However, some parties have not yet learned the lessons of history, which is repeating itself today amidst the international community's inability to act. The occupation forces continue to violate the ceasefire agreement, targeting the lives of Palestinian civilians wherever they are, in a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. This crime of aggression has caused the deaths of more than 52,000 Palestinian martyrs, and over 120,000 injuries have been caused among innocent civilians, most of whom are women and children. In addition, humanitarian aid is being prevented, and hunger is being used as a weapon of war and collective punishment. Tunisia, which has itself faced colonialism and has never committed aggression against any people, strongly condemns this barbaric and ongoing aggression, which is a violation of the ceasefire agreement and completely flouts all rules of international humanitarian law and all values. The goal of this is to undermine peace efforts and further inflame the situation in the region. Mr. President, the disaster in Gaza and the West Bank is worsening in a horrifying way. The continued brutal occupation imposes collective punishment, and there's intensified indiscriminate shelling. The targeting of UNRWA facilities aims to kill as many Palestinians as possible. Here, I would like to renew Tunisia's support for the vital role played by UNRWA in alleviating the suffering of the Palestinian people. We also renew our call for the international community to assume its responsibility to end the aggressive behavior of the occupying power and to guarantee a ceasefire and a lifting of the siege to allow the Palestinian people to receive humanitarian aid and rebuild their land, thus ensuring a dignified life for them. Mr. President, in closing, we renew our support for the steadfastness of the heroic Palestinian people as they struggle to regain their inalienable rights, foremost among which are the right to self-determination and to establish their own independent, sovereign state on all of Palestinian territory with East Jerusalem as its capital. We call on all supporters of universal principles and justice to continue pursuing accountability for those responsible for genocide and oppression. Thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Tunisia for that statement. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank the French presidency for convening this timely and important debate and commend France for its leadership throughout the months. Kazakhstan expresses its deep concern over the continued escalation of violence and humanitarian suffering in the Middle East, particularly in Gaza and the West Bank. We join others in calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire and the protection of civilians in full accordance with the international humanitarian and human rights law. We also support the immediate release of all hostages and unimpeded humanitarian access, and pay tribute to the courage and medical and relief personnel working under dire conditions. We underline the central role of UNRWA in supporting Palestinian refugees and call for sustained and predictable support to ensure the continuity of its mandate. Kazakhstan reaffirms its principled position in favor of the two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine coexisting in peace and security within internationally recognized borders, based on the pre-1967 lines and with East Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Palestine. In this context, we welcome the convening of the high-level international conference on the two-state solution this June and express our full support for its principal objective, and commend the Republic of France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for their leadership and dedicated efforts in facilitating this crucial and timely endeavor. The ongoing crisis underscores the urgent need to reinvigorate a credible and comprehensive political process. We firmly believe that a lasting solution must be based on the relevant Security Council resolutions and the range of existing initiatives aimed at resolving the conflict, which together provide a solid foundation for achieving a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace in accordance with the principles of international law. Kazakhstan calls on this Council to assume a unified and constructive role in restoring dialogue and confidence. A durable peace is only possible through restraint, mutual recognition, and international solidarity. We urge the international community to address the root causes of the conflict and invest in the future of both peoples. Mr. President, more broadly, Kazakhstan views peace in the Middle East as essential to regional and global stability. We support the UN-led efforts for inclusive political settlements in Syria, sustainable peace in Yemen, and stability in Lebanon through restored governance and economic reforms. Kazakhstan remains ready to support any initiative that upholds peace, justice, and the shared humanity of all peoples in the region. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Kazakhstan for his statement. I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Spain. Mr. President, we are grateful for this opportunity to speak to the Council at a time when the Middle East region is once again facing a new spiral of violence. Spain condemns the break in the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas on the 2nd of March, when it should have been proceeding to the implementation of Phase 2 and the initiation of negotiations to put an end to the war. The resumption of attacks in Gaza and the ramped-up military operations in the West Bank worsen an unsustainable humanitarian situation in which humanitarian workers and facilities have also become military targets. This is in flagrant violation of IHL. Spain reiterates its call to the parties to resume the ceasefire agreement. It is the only way to guarantee the release of all hostages, and we are thankful to the mediator countries, Qatar, Egypt, and the U.S. The humanitarian situation has been prolonged in Gaza, and there is no aid that has reached them in the past 2 months. There are more than 51,200 people dead, and almost the entirety of the population is displaced, and no safe zones. We stand firm in defending UNRWA. Its margin for action is increasingly small, and since the Advisory Commission, which is chaired by Spain through the end of July, we continue to coordinate host and donor countries to ensure that UNRWA can continue to operate and retain its essential humanitarian role and ability to support the stabilization phase. In order to ensure stabilization, the Palestinian Authority, which is our partner for peace in the face of terrorism by Hamas, must shoulder its responsibility as the sole government in Gaza and the West Bank. We continue to promote the work of the Global Alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution, to promote a high-level conference to be held at the end of June here, which should lead to the realization of a Palestinian state as essential for peace in the region, and not as the result of a negotiating process. We also support Saudi Arabia and France in the hope that the holding of this conference will be successful. Just and lasting peace in the region necessarily means restoring respect for the principles of the UN Charter, including respect for territorial integrity, particularly in Lebanon and Syria. Spain reiterates its appeal to the parties to fully comply with Resolution 1701 of the Security Council and with the November 2024 cessation of hostilities agreement. We continue to support stabilization through UNIFIL and the political and financial support of the Lebanese armed forces. We welcome the formation of a transitional government in Syria, which must represent a step towards peaceful and inclusive transition, guaranteeing unity in the country and upholding accountability as a central element for transitional justice. Spain will continue to support international mechanisms devoted to that end, as well as the lifting of sanctions, which is essential so the Syrian people can rebuild their country. We welcome the start of indirect talks between Iran and the U.S. on the Iranian nuclear program. There is no military alternative to a political solution for resolving this issue. Spain will continue to advocate dialogue with regional partners to promote peace and stability in the Near East. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant permanent de...
I thank the permanent representative of Spain. I give the floor to the representative of Morocco.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. أود في البداية أن أهنئكم على عقد
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me at the outset to congratulate you on holding this meeting presided over by His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of France, Mr. Jean-Noël Barrot. I also thank His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his briefing. The Kingdom of Morocco, led by His Majesty King Mohammed VI, may God assist him, which chairs the Al-Quds Committee of the OIC, reaffirms its firm position on justice of the Palestinian cause. We support the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, beginning with the right to establish an independent, sovereign, viable Palestinian state within the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, in which Gaza would be an integral part of the Palestinian territories, independent Palestinian territories. Here I'd like to sincerely thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the French Republic for chairing the high-level international conference for the implementation of the two-state solution, which will take place in New York in June. Despite the critical situation and the challenges that the Middle East is going through, we believe this conference will be a pivotal point in the course of the Palestinian cause, and we hope that it will achieve the desired goals. We also commend the efforts made as part of the international coalition to implement the two-state solution, chaired by Saudi Arabia, the EU, and Norway. We've had the pleasure of organizing a meeting in Rabat on 2021 of 2025, together with the Netherlands. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Morocco strongly condemns the renewed attacks on civilians in Gaza. These Israeli attacks have caused many casualties, and they are unacceptable. They do not contribute to peace in the region. The Kingdom of Morocco emphasizes the importance of guaranteeing access of humanitarian aid, as well as medical supplies and basic necessities that would be an unhindered access for the residents of Gaza and other Palestinian territories. We also insist on strict compliance with international law, international humanitarian law. Mr. President, the immediate ceasefire in Gaza in accordance with Resolution 2735 of the Security Council remains a top priority. His Majesty King Mohammed VI, as chair of the Al-Quds Committee, has declared that the ceasefire is a fundamental element for the upcoming period and should not be subject to selfish calculations or bargaining. The Kingdom of Morocco, led by His Majesty the King, reaffirms the importance of an immediate, unconditional ceasefire. We must not undermine the efforts needed for an exchange of prisoners and detainees. The return to a ceasefire would allow for access to humanitarian aid in sufficient quantity and would allow for the reconstruction of what the war has destroyed. This is a key step toward establishing a Palestinian state, 1967 borders, living side by side in peace and security with Israel. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Morocco reaffirms the central role of UNRWA. No other agency or entity can play the role that UNRWA plays in serving Palestinian refugees. Morocco reaffirms the need of supporting UNRWA to provide it with the necessary resources to fully carry out its lofty mission. Mr. President, unilateral measures carried out in Al-Quds al-Sharif are leading to further instability and violence in the region. The King of Morocco is closely following all developments in the Palestinian cause, and His Majesty calls for the importance of preserving the legal, historical, and demographic status of this holy city, a city holy for the three monotheistic religions. In parallel, the Al-Quds Committee plays a political and practical role in supporting the Palestinian people as a whole and the residents of Jerusalem in particular. The committee is working on the ground and is, in doing so, led by His Majesty to carry out education programs and projects to benefit the residents of Jerusalem. These initiatives have been favorably received by the Palestinian leadership and people. In closing, we support all initiatives that aim at arriving at a lasting ceasefire in Gaza and address the humanitarian situation. We will continue to strive to serve the Palestinian cause together with the international community in order to relaunch negotiations, which are the only way of achieving security, peace, and stability in the Middle East region. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Morocco for that statement. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Uganda.
Mr. President, I'm honored to deliver this statement on behalf of the 121 member states of the Non-Aligned Movement, NAM. I congratulate France upon its accession to the presidency of the Security Council this month and express appreciation for granting NAM the opportunity to present its position on the question of Palestine at this most crucial juncture. NAM reaffirms its long-standing, common, and principled position on the question of Palestine and is deeply concerned about the implications of the ongoing conflict and unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza on the Palestinian people, on the prospects for a just solution to this historic injustice and for peace and security in the region. There has been no reprieve to the grave situation in Gaza, and the conflict has intensified, worsening the humanitarian situation not only in Gaza, but also throughout the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. The members of the United Nations conferred on the Security Council the primary responsibility for maintenance of international peace and security in accordance with Articles 12 and 24 of the Charter. The Security Council must uphold its mandate to maintain international peace and security and must act to implement its own resolutions, including Resolution 2735 of 2024, calling for an immediate ceasefire. The question of Palestine cannot be an exemption to international law and to the authority of this Council. Therefore, NAM calls on the Security Council to act forthwith to justly resolve the Palestinian question and bring an end to this protracted conflict and tragic injustice. The peaceful resolution to the question of Palestine is central for establishing durable peace and stability in the Middle East and is a matter of grave concern for the maintenance of international peace and security. NAM condemns in the strongest terms all forms of violence, particularly Israel's military attacks and collective punishment against the Palestinian people, as a grave breach of international law, including humanitarian and human rights law, the killing and injury of tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, the majority of whom are children and women, including medical personnel, humanitarian workers, and journalists, is an indictment to the mandate of the UN Security Council and our obligations under the Charter and other tenets of the international law, including Article 1 of the Geneva Conventions, to respect and ensure respect of the conventions in all circumstances. Once again, the movement stresses Palestine cannot be the exception. NAM demands an immediate and complete cessation of all forms of armed hostilities, violent repression, illegal Israeli policies and practices against the Palestinian people and other nations in the region. The Non-Aligned Movement expresses its appreciation to the role played by the Arab Republic of Egypt and the State of Qatar, both members of our movement, in securing the ceasefire agreement that went into effect on 19th January 2025, and in achieving an immediate and permanent ceasefire. Accordingly, NAM reiterates its calls for the release of hostages, the exchange of Palestinian prisoners, the return of Palestinian civilians to their homes and neighborhoods in all areas of Gaza, and the immediate, safe, and effective distribution of sufficient humanitarian assistance throughout the Gaza Strip to all Palestinian civilians who need it, including medical needs. NAM deplores the hermetic and lawful siege imposed by Israel on Gaza, by which it has completely blocked the entry of humanitarian aid to Gaza since 2nd March and deprived the Palestinian civilian population of the essentials of life, including food, water, medicine, fuel, basic services. Now members express grave concern at reports of repeated forced starvation and forced displacement of the civilian population throughout Gaza and demand a cessation of such inhuman and illegal actions. In this context, the non-aligned movement expresses its support to the Arab Islamic Plan for Early Recovery, Reconstruction and Development of Gaza, which was presented by the Arab Republic of Egypt in full coordination with the State of Palestine and endorsed by both the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The non-aligned movement strongly condemns the continued Israeli occupation of 5 locations in southern Lebanon, in addition to the designation of 2 buffer zones within the Lebanese territory, which constitutes a flagrant violation of Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and a blatant breach of Resolution 1701 of 2006 and of the Cessation of Hostilities Agreement. The movement stresses the need for the Security Council to assume its responsibility to compel Israel to withdraw completely, immediately, and unconditionally from all occupied Lebanese territories. The movement commends the progress made by the Lebanese armed forces in deploying in the area south of the Litani River. The movement calls for the full implementation of the Resolution 1701 of 2006 in a manner that ensures sustainable stability along the border and calls for the full respect of Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. To this end, the movement reiterates its call to the international community to extend all support to Lebanon. NAM stresses that establishing peace in the Middle East requires Israel's withdrawal from occupied Arab territories, including occupied Syrian Arab Golan, and implementing relevant United Nations resolutions, most notably Security Council Resolution 242 of 1967, 338 1973, 497 1981, which reaffirmed that the acquisition of territory by force is inadmissible in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and the principles of international law, and that the Israeli decision to impose its laws, jurisdiction, and administration in the occupied Syrian Golan is null and void and without international legal effect. NAM also calls the Security Council to exert pressure on Israel to withdraw from the Syrian territories it has invaded since 8 December 2024 and after. NAM condemns the repeated Israeli attacks against the territory of the Syrian Arab Republic as they constitute a clear aggression against the territory of a sovereign state and a flagrant violation of the provisions of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. Now further recalls Security Council Resolution 2334 of 2016, which provides for a viable path to peace, setting forth the essential requirements and parameters for the realization of the just solution to the question of Palestine. Now member states reaffirm their commitment to a just solution in accordance with the relevant United Nations resolutions on the basis of the two-state solution based on the June 4th, 1967 lines, and ensuring the fulfillment by the Palestinian people of their inalienable rights, including the self-determination and independence of the state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital, and the just solution to the plight of the Palestinian refugees in accordance with the General Assembly Resolution A//RES/194-3. NAM supports the ongoing global action support of the implementation of relevant UN resolutions on a two-state solution and the comprehensive, just, and peaceful settlement of the Palestinian question. To this end, we welcome the convening of the high-level international conference on the implementation of the resolutions pertaining to the question of Palestine and the two-state solution in line with UNGA Resolution ES10/24 and all relevant resolutions under the chairmanship of Saudi Arabia and France, and welcome the strong and principled position and firm in the recent consultations convened on 9th April. Similarly, NAM commends efforts undertaken within the framework of the Global Alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution under the chairmanship of Saudi Arabia, EU, and Norway. NAM member states affirm their readiness to actively participate in the international conference towards ensuring the success of its objectives. NAM also calls on the United Nations Security Council to urgently recommend the admission of Palestine as a full member of the United Nations in line with the two-state solution enshrined in the United States resolution, in the United Nations resolution, and as a commitment to lasting peace in the Middle East. Now, member states once again reiterate their call for the continued provision of the needed humanitarian and socio-economic assistance to the Palestinian people, including Palestinian refugees. The movement reaffirmed the continued indispensability of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, along with other United Nations agencies and international organizations in the provision of urgently needed humanitarian assistance in line with international standards, and urges the international community to support the agency in all ways, including with sufficient and predictable funding. Now deplores is the legislation against the continuity of UNRWA and obstruction of its operations as a threat to the General Assembly mandate to provide humanitarian assistance until a just solution is achieved. To conclude, Mr. President, the movement seizes this opportunity to reiterate its call for collective international efforts to uphold international law to bring an end to this historic and grave injustice. Now member states reaffirm their commitment to promoting a just, lasting, comprehensive, and peaceful solution to the question of Palestine in all its aspects, including for the plight of the Palestinian refugees, and reaffirm their support for the Palestinian people in their struggle to achieve justice and fulfill their inalienable rights and legitimate national aspirations, including self-determination, freedom, and independence in their sovereign and independent state of Palestine, with its Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement for that statement, and now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Ireland.
Thank you, President. Ireland aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. We thank France for convening today's meeting and thank the Secretary-General for his briefing. President, it is deeply shocking to take stock of where things stand in Gaza today. Almost 1 year on from its adoption, Security Council Resolution 2735, which provided a clear pathway for the release of all hostages and a permanent end to hostilities, remains unimplemented. The failure to move to Phase 2 of the ceasefire and hostage release deal has been devastating for the hostages and their families and for Palestinians in Gaza. We call again for an immediate cessation of hostilities, the immediate release of all remaining hostages so cruelly held by Hamas, and the immediate resumption of humanitarian assistance at scale into and throughout Gaza. Ireland condemns the resumption of Israeli airstrikes and ground operations, which have brought fresh suffering to the people of Gaza and have breached the ceasefire. Israel's continuing blockade of humanitarian aid and commercial supplies into Gaza, imposed on the 2nd of March, is rapidly deepening the hunger crisis in Gaza. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has noted that this amounts to collective punishment and may also amount to the use of starvation as a method of war. Accounts of the effects of severe malnutrition on children in Gaza are deeply disturbing. President, outrageous strikes by Israeli forces on humanitarian personnel, infrastructure, premises and healthcare facilities have crossed new thresholds. We see the continued obstruction of UNRWA's operations in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and in Gaza. There is no alternative to UNRWA, and we commend the bravery and determination of UNRWA staff in maintaining their stay and deliver stance. We are concerned by new visa and registration rules for NGOs announced by Israel that could further undermine humanitarian efforts and shrink civil society space. President, Resolution 2735 also set out key principles that must underpin a sustainable peace. A rejection by the Security Council of any attempt at demographic or territorial change in the Gaza Strip. A reiteration by the UN Security Council of its unwavering commitment to the two-state solution, and clear recognition by the UN Security Council of the importance of unifying the Gaza Strip with the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority. Ireland welcomes the continuing strong consensus on the need to move forward on the basis of these principles. Yet, while the international community seeks to make progress, the UN Security Council continues to receive reports of inflammatory rhetoric by senior Israeli officials around seizing, annexing and dividing territory and about transferring Palestinians outside Gaza. It continues to receive reports of unabated expansion of illegal settlements, while some Israeli ministers advocate for Israeli sovereignty in the occupied Palestinian territory. What we are witnessing on the ground in Gaza and in the West Bank is indicative of a complete disregard for international law, the UN Security Council, and the integrity of the United Nations as an institution. More fundamentally, it is an affront to our humanity, and it must end. President, we must seize the opportunity, including through the Arab Recovery and Reconstruction Plan and the UN High-Level Conference in June, to demonstrate that we are determined to defend the equal right to self-determination, peace, security and dignity for Israelis and Palestinians. The overwhelming will of the international community must be translated into a clear and time-bound plan for the implementation of the two-state solution. Turning to Syria, we welcome the fall of the Assad regime and the intentions demonstrated by the transitional authorities. The agreements with Kurdish and Druze communities and the signing of an interim constitution and the announcement of a transitional government are important steps towards a fully inclusive transition process, one that respects the rights of all Syrians, irrespective of faith or ethnicity, and that guarantees the rights of Syrian women. However, we remain concerned by the overall security situation in Syria, particularly in the northeast. It is imperative that the international community and all neighbouring states act responsibly and refrain from actions that jeopardise the transition process and that preserve Syria's territorial integrity. Ireland will continue to support the Syrian people and has pledged €21.8 million in 2025. The fragile security situation in southern Lebanon remains a significant worry. Both sides must meet their commitments under the ceasefire agreement and through full implementation of Resolution 1701. Communities across the Blue Line must be allowed to return to their homes in safety. We commend the efforts of President Aoun, Prime Minister Sawaf and the Government of Lebanon to chart a path to a better future for the people of Lebanon. Again, the international community must support these efforts. President, in closing, the situation in the Middle East is at an extremely difficult juncture. We must see an urgent resumption of the Gaza ceasefire and hostage release deal. We call on the Security Council to uphold its responsibilities without delay. Millions of lives and regional and global security depend on this. I thank you.
I thank the Prime Representative of Ireland for that statement, and now I would like to remind speakers to please limit their interventions to 3 minutes maximum, so the Council can carry out its work in the best possible conditions and allow all those who requested the floor to take the floor during this meeting. We still have 30 speakers in less than 2 hours left, and I give the floor to New Zealand.
Our last open debate came at a critical juncture. A ceasefire deal had been reached in Gaza, under which the first hostage release had just taken place. We are deeply saddened that 3 months later, the situation has gotten worse, not better. We remain horrified by this conflict. Both sides have obligations that they must meet. Hamas must release the remaining hostages immediately. They have suffered an unimaginable ordeal for far too long. Hamas's actions also reduce prospects for peace and are contrary to the interests of the Palestinian people, as evidenced by recent protests in Gaza. Israel must return its focus to a political solution, starting with an immediate return to a ceasefire. New Zealand continues to unequivocally condemn the appalling 7 October attacks. But as we keep repeating, civilians in Gaza cannot continue to pay the price for this. We are gravely concerned by the renewed fighting. As we've heard over the last 2 days, no humanitarian aid is being allowed in. Humanitarian workers, including UN staff, have been killed, despite their protected status under international law. We are far from where we were in January. We call on the parties to recommit to the ceasefire deal. To repeat, civilians must be protected. Hostages must be released, and there needs to be a rapid, unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. We are also extremely concerned about the instability in the West Bank, fueled by illegal settlement expansion, military activity, and governance challenges. For decades, New Zealand has shared the international community's view that the best path to peace is a two-state solution with recognised borders for both Israel and Palestine. We want to live in a world where Israelis and Palestinians can coexist side by side in peace, security, and dignity. Israelis and Palestinians deserve to feel safe. This is not about finding another technical solution. It is about finding the political will to implement the technical solution that already exists. All parties should take meaningful steps towards a two-state solution in order to ensure a durable and lasting peace. President, we welcome the announcement that the United States will hold direct nuclear talks with Iran. This is an important step towards achieving a comprehensive outcome that promotes regional stability. New Zealand is also pleased to see the Syrian interim authorities engaging positively with the international community. In the OPCW, the interim foreign minister recently spoke on Syria's chemical weapons after 11 years of non-cooperation by the Assad regime. This was a historic moment. While the interim authorities face a long road ahead, the constitutional declaration signed in March 2025 makes provisions for freedom of expression and religion and women's rights. We call for its full implementation and hope it will serve as a successful framework for a peaceful transition in Syria. Thank you, President.
I thank the Prime Minister of New Zealand for that intervention and now give the floor to the PR of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, Mr. President, we speak at a time of deep moral and legal failure. Gaza is enduring a severe humanitarian catastrophe, not solely due to the Israeli military actions, but also because of the impunity granted by the United States and some Western countries. The continued provision of weapons, political backing, and financial support enable Israel to commit further atrocities in grave violation of international law. The total blockade of food, water, fuel, and medicine imposed on Gaza constitute collective punishment. It flagrantly violates the Fourth Geneva Convention and amounts to a war crime. At the same time, illegal settlements are expanding. Palestinians are being forced off their land, their homes demolished, their movement restricted, and subjected to settler attack. These acts are part of a larger plan to annex land and erase Palestinian presence. Such illegal acts violate international law and Security Council resolutions. Against this backdrop, I wish to emphasize the following points. First, Gaza requires an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Priorities must include humanitarian access, aid delivery, and prisoner exchange. Second, a permanent ceasefire must be followed by Gaza reconstruction. Reconstruction efforts must respect Palestinian rights and reject any schemes involving forced displacement or resettlement in third countries. Palestinians must determine their own future united. Third, it is time for the Palestine to become a full UN member without condition. Palestine meets all membership criteria. The US veto of the Council's resolution ignored the global community's will, which overwhelmingly supported Palestine's membership through a General Assembly resolution with 143 votes in favor. Fourth, the Palestinian right to self-determination is non-negotiable. Establishing an independent, sovereign Palestinian state with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital remains the legitimate aspiration of the Palestinian people. It is essential that the Palestinian group remain united. Any division only serves Israeli interests. Fifth, without ending the occupation and aggression, peace and stability in the region will remain elusive. The Security Council must compel Israel to withdraw its occupying forces from the Palestinian occupied territories, Lebanon and Syria, and end its ongoing aggression and violation. Mr. President, in closing, the main threat to peace and stability in the region comes from the terrorist and destabilizing actions of the Israeli regime and its main sponsor, the United States. The existence of this regime is built on terror, murder, aggression, and occupation. It constantly fuels conflict, undermines regional stability, and violates international law. Beyond its brutal attack in Gaza, Israel commits near daily acts of aggression against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon and Syria. They are deliberate, systematic, and deeply destabilizing. Israel continues its aggression and occupation only because of full political, military, and diplomatic support from the United States. If the U.S. stopped this support just today, Israel would be forced to follow international law and respect its obligation. The Security Council must not stay silent. It must act now, firmly and urgently, to uphold international law, defend the UN Charter, and protect civilians from further harm. I thank you.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Iran for that statement, and I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Switzerland. Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank France for organizing this debate, for our collective commitment is urgent to uphold the fundamental rules and principles of international law, implement the UN Charter, and consolidate the action of multilateral institutions in order to restore peace and stability in the region. The independent sovereignty and territorial integrity of states are regularly violated in defiance of the Charter and resolutions adopted by this Council. We call for these fundamental texts to be respected, especially to prevent further escalation of tensions in Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, as well as the occupied Palestinian territory. Switzerland supports the work of the UN, including its humanitarian agencies and peacekeeping operations. These instruments were established to ensure that law prevails over force, justice over impunity, and peace over war. The regional and human consequences of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have continued to worsen since the acts of terror on the 7th of October 2023, which we strongly condemned. Switzerland joins the many voices deploring the breakdown of the ceasefire agreement in Gaza. We call on the parties to immediately return to the ceasefire. Such an agreement must allow for the protection of civilians, the release of all hostages, rapid, safe, and unimpeded humanitarian access, and the conclusion of a permanent ceasefire leading to lasting peace. The current humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip is catastrophic. OCHA describes it as, quote, the worst humanitarian crisis since the start of hostilities 18 months ago. The blocking of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip and the attacks on convoys, infrastructure, and humanitarian workers are unacceptable. Switzerland recalls that meeting the needs of the population and ensuring its protection, as well as that of humanitarian workers, are obligations under international humanitarian law. Resolution 2730, adopted by this Council at my country's initiative in May 2024, strongly condemns, and I quote, the unlawful denial of humanitarian access and the obstruction of the delivery of relief supplies to address conflict-induced food insecurity. However, the World Food Programme warned on April 25th that food reserves there were now completely exhausted. Switzerland recalls that the use of famine as a method of warfare is a war crime under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. We condemn all violations of international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law committed by all parties to the conflict. Independent investigations must be conducted, and the perpetrators of these violations must be brought to justice. Mr. President, Switzerland welcomes France's efforts during its presidency of the Security Council to revitalize collective political commitment to the protection of civilians and respect for international humanitarian law. Yesterday's event, organized by your delegation in support of the ICRC's global initiative, sent an important signal in this regard. For humanity must be preserved in war. We must return to the rule of law and remove all obstacles to peace one by one. In the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, this includes ending the illegal occupation and Israeli settlements, which are illegal under international law, as recalled in this Council's Resolution 2334 and the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of July 2024, which we support. The expansion of settlements accompanied by settler violence perpetrated with quasi-impunity must therefore cease immediately. The solution of two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders, is the only possible basis for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. It is a crucial step towards peace in the entire region. That's why Switzerland will participate in the international conference to be organized by France and Saudi Arabia next June under the auspices of the UN in New York. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante permanente de
I thank the representative of Switzerland for the declaration and now give the floor to Oman.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Sultanate of Oman would like to congratulate the Republic of France for its presidency of the Council this month, and we thank you for holding this session. Mr. President, the Middle East continues to face various challenges since the founding of the United Nations, more specifically the question of Palestine and the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. Gaza has become one of the worst pictures of humanitarian catastrophe that humanity has witnessed as a result of the barbaric Israeli aggression on millions of innocents. The lack of international intervention to put a stop to this aggression sends a dangerous message, which is that international law is only selectively applied. The daily massacres and the starvation, the collective starvation of civilians and targeting them and their infrastructure, including their hospitals and their schools and shelters, are a blatant and flagrant violation of all international norms and laws and are a crime against humanity. The Sultanate of Oman condemns in the harshest of terms the siege that has been imposed on Gaza, and we warn of the repercussions of continuing to use starvation and collective punishment as a weapon of war. We also stress that impunity must not be allowed and that accountability must be pursued for these grave violations. And here Oman expresses its sincere gratitude for the great efforts that are being made by United Nations agencies, especially the UNRWA and its field workers who are working under the harshest of conditions, risking their lives to deliver humanitarian and medical aid to civilian residents in the Gaza Strip. In addition, my country condemns attempts to weaken the UNRWA and obstruct its humanitarian work. We call upon the international community to secure its continued funding and support until a just and permanent solution is reached to the question of Palestine and Palestinian refugees. We also need to offer the necessary protection to UNRWA workers and make sure that they're able to perform their tasks without being targeted or being hindered. The Security Council cannot expect its resolutions to be applied in some other issues while not expecting its resolutions to be issued in terms to be implemented in the Palestinian question. Resolution 2735, which demanded an immediate ceasefire, is a clear example. Oman calls upon Security Council to shoulder its historic responsibility and to adopt a clear resolution that calls for a comprehensive and immediate ceasefire and guarantees international protection to the Palestinian people and issues a recommendation to grant Palestine full membership in the United Nations as a step to rebalance this continued injustice that has existed for over 7 decades. Here, we would like to note my country's appreciation to the countries that have declared that they're acceding to the coalition to recognize Palestine. This is a brave step that is in the right direction towards peace in the region and reinstating justice. Here, Oman would like to note the mediation efforts by Egypt and Qatar and the United States, noble efforts that aim to put an end to the aggression and to establish a permanent truce. And we support the reconstruction plan that has been proposed by Egypt in coordination with the State of Palestine, which enjoys Arab and Islamic support. This is a ray of hope for people who have suffered from destruction and eviction and have been abandoned internationally. And we would like to welcome the efforts by France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the ongoing preparations for the peace conference on a two-state solution that is due to be held. the lack of a clear political horizon, the continued occupation and settlement, and the continued efforts to abort any solution that could lead to peace only further threatens the region. We believe that the only way to achieve peace and security, peace and stability in the Middle East is through putting an end to the Israeli occupation of all Arab territories and the withdrawal from the Syrian Golan, and for Lebanon to regain all of its territories and to implement all relevant United Nations resolutions, and for Israel to stop seeking any gains in the occupied territories and beyond them. And we stress that Al-Quds al-Sharif is not simply a Palestinian cause alone. Rather, it is a cause for a nation. It is a matter of dignity and right and justice. Any attempt to change the legal and historic and religious status of Al-Quds Jerusalem is flatly rejected. In closing, Oman stresses that the security and stability of the region will only be achieved through realizing the Palestinian people's legitimate rights, at the forefront of which is the right to establish their independent state that enjoys sovereignty over their territories within the 4 June 1967 borders, with its capital as East Jerusalem, based on international legitimacy resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative. Moreover, my country will continue very clearly and very steadfastly to stand by the Palestinian people in their legitimate struggle until they regain their dignity and full liberty, because we believe that the absence of a just and comprehensive solution to this conflict is a threat to regional and international peace and feeds cycles of violence and extremism. Therefore, we call on all international efforts to work together to reach a just peace that would put an end to this historic injustice and would guarantee a safe and stable future for the whole region. I thank you.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Oman for that statement. I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Brazil.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brazil commends France for convening this open debate and for co-organizing together with Saudi Arabia in June the high-level international conference for the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. We warmly welcome this most-needed initiative. We are witnessing a humanitarian catastrophe of staggering proportions in Gaza. The continuity of the conflict and the levels of pain and horror it has achieved are already a stain on history. The upcoming conference represents an opportunity for us all. It must mark a turning point for Palestine, wholly addressing the structural aspects underlying a two-state solution. It must therefore reaffirm the urgency of ending Israel's unlawful occupation of Palestinian territory in accordance with the advisory opinion of the ICJ. The conference must also advance toward the recognition of the State of Palestine and its full UN membership, reaffirming the international community's commitment to fulfilling the Palestinian inalienable right to self-determination. The time has come for concrete steps towards an independent and viable Palestinian state living side by side with Israel in peace and security within the 1967 borders, which includes the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, with East Jerusalem as its capital. The two-state solution is the only possible and viable path. It should have been implemented years, even decades ago. Now, more than ever, is the time to act. Mr. President, Brazil reiterates its call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, with the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from the territory, the cessation of forced displacement of Palestinians, the release of all hostages and political prisoners, the full respect of obligations under international humanitarian law, and the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance at scale. These are essential steps to prevent further loss of life and to pave the way for peace and recovery and rebuilding. Brazil strongly supports UNRWA's indispensable mandate, whose life-saving work must be safeguarded, not undermined. We condemn the use of humanitarian aid for political purposes and the repeated attacks against humanitarian personnel and UN staff. These are grave breaches of international humanitarian law. Accountability must prevail and perpetrators must be brought to justice. Gaza's reconstruction must begin with full Palestinian ownership, as well as the reunification of Gaza and the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority. Elsewhere in the region, the risk of further escalation remains high, with increasingly severe humanitarian crises. Brazil is deeply concerned with violations of the ceasefire in Lebanon and continued Israeli attacks against Lebanese and Syrian territory. We call on Israel to respect the sovereignty of both countries in accordance with international law and relevant Security Council resolutions. The deteriorating situation in Yemen is another strong concern that is also fueling the region's instability. Addressing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a fundamental step toward dealing with other points of instability in the region, benefiting both neighboring countries and the wider international community. Mr. President, we strongly encourage member states that have not yet done so to recognize Palestine's statehood, as Brazil did back in 2010. The universal recognition of the Palestinian state and its admission as a full-fledged member of the UN are decisive means for reducing the asymmetry between the parties in the context of a two-state solution. Brazil remains committed to contributing to the success of the conference on the implementation of the two-state solution next June. We support all efforts towards a just, comprehensive and lasting peace in the Middle East, starting with the implementation of all relevant UN resolutions and the full implementation of the two-state solution. A peaceful Middle East is possible, and the international community, particularly the Palestinian people, can count on Brazil's full support to make it happen. Thank you. I thank the Permanent Representative of Brazil for his statement. I give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. 3 months ago, we welcomed the Gaza ceasefire agreement with a fragile yet fervent hope the nightmare since Hamas' brutal acts of terror would be over. All the hostages would return home and unbearable human suffering would begin to ease. Regrettably, however, that moment of hope was brief. The resumption of hostilities has plunged Gaza once again into a catastrophe. The toll has been staggering, countless lives lost, including innocent civilians and even aid workers. Israel has blocked all forms of humanitarian assistance for more than 50 days. According to the United Nations, this has placed hundreds of thousands of people in imminent danger of severe hunger and malnutrition. This tragedy must end. Japan has repeatedly called on all parties to return to negotiations and restore ceasefire without delay. All parties must ensure safe and unhindered humanitarian operations and respect international law, including international humanitarian law. Meanwhile, the West Bank is also enduring deepening anguish under extremist settler violence. We urge Israel to take appropriate measures to minimize civilian harm. Mr. President, even in this darkest of hours, we must not stop working to lay the foundation for a lasting peace. Over the decades, my country has disbursed billions of dollars for Palestine. Since October 7, 2023 alone, our contribution have encompassed approximately $230 million in humanitarian assistance. We will continue to help the most vulnerable, not in words alone, but tangibly and meaningfully. And Japan's support for a two-state solution, where Israel and the future Palestinian state live side by side in peace and security, remains unchanged, as we believe that this is the only viable and sustainable solution. Mr. President, while the situation in Palestine is grave, there are promising signs elsewhere in the Middle East. Syria has been steadily undergoing a transition process. We see the appointment of new ministers by Syrian Interim Authority as a positive step, and we expect all parties concerned to play a constructive role in promoting an inclusive political settlement through dialogue among Syrian people. In Lebanon, the cessation of hostilities largely holding after the ceasefire agreement was reached. Japan fully supports the government of Lebanon and work of UNIFIL and UNSC, and calls on all parties to work toward achieving long-term peace and stability. Finally, let me briefly address the Iranian nuclear issue. which has far-reaching implications for the region and the wider international community. Japan is deeply concerned about Iran's nuclear developments. We believe talks taking place between the United States and Iran and hope for a meaningful breakthrough. All parties should take constructive actions at all levels to advance dialogue toward a peaceful resolution of the nuclear issue. We will continue to play our part, drawing upon our long-standing relationship with Iran. I thank you.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Japan for his statement. I give the floor to the Representative of Armenia.
Mr. President, we thank the Presidency of France for convening the Security Council open debate on the theme of the situation in the Middle East with a view to respond to new realities. We thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his comprehensive presentation, which outlined the activities of the UN in addressing numerous challenges in the region, particularly the provision of humanitarian assistance to people affected by conflicts and crises. The Republic of Armenia is genuinely committed to establishing peace and stability in the Middle East, notably achieving a peaceful, just, and comprehensive settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in line with the two-state solution. Reaffirming its commitment to international law and the principles of equality, sovereignty, and peaceful coexistence of peoples. On 21st June 2024, Armenia recognized the state of Palestine and established diplomatic ties with the hope that the existence of the viable Palestinian state will turn the page of decades-long violence between the Arab and Jewish peoples in the Middle East and pave the way for peaceful coexistence, ensuring a brighter future for the entire region. Protection of civilian population, including children and women, unconditional release of all the hostages and humanitarian assistance to those in need is an important priority for Armenia. After the outbreak of hostilities following October 7, 2023, Armenia has been persistently advocating the basic rights of civilian victims of the conflict and has been joining all relevant resolutions of the UN General Assembly calling for immediate ceasefire in Gaza, demanding the parties to comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law and ensure humanitarian access. Being deeply concerned of the ongoing catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza, back in 2024, Armenia has provided humanitarian assistance to address the critical humanitarian needs of the civilian population in Gaza. Acknowledging the indispensable role of UNRWA in the Near East in addressing the humanitarian plight of the Palestinian refugees, Armenia has provided financial assistance to UNRWA to facilitate its humanitarian tasks in Gaza. We hope that the upcoming high-level international conference for the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution will serve as a platform to discuss in good faith the resolution of the long-standing conflict and achievement of a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace in the region. Mr. President, Armenia has consistently supported the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Syria and the right of the Syrian people to define their own future. During the visit of the delegation of Armenia to Damascus in January this year, Armenia has pledged its support in humanitarian, socio-economic, and other areas. It has already materialized by provision of humanitarian aid to the Syrian people. We appreciate the assistance of the government of Turkey in temporarily opening of the closed border with Armenia for the passage of humanitarian consignment. For many years, the Armenian mission of medical personnel and humanitarian deminers have contributed the humanitarian response to the needs of Syrian people, including through implementation of projects in cooperation with the UN Mine Action Service. Armenia stands ready to renew humanitarian demining activities in Syria in cooperation with the Syrian authorities and UNMAS. Armenia welcomes achievement of ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel in November 2024. Despite the security challenges and the recent escalation in Lebanon, Armenian peacekeepers in the UNIFIL, alongside their international partners, continue fulfilling their peacekeeping duties, demonstrating Armenia's commitment to international peace and security in the region. Armenia places great importance to the protection of cultural heritage of the region. In this context, Armenia has made a financial contribution to the Blue Shield International to implement projects in Lebanon to restore the damaged cultural monuments. The experts of Matenadaran, Armenian Institute of Ancient Manuscripts, continue to support capacity building and restoration activities of the Center for the Digitization of Oriental Manuscripts in Erbil within the UNESCO flagship program, Revive the Spirit of Mosul. I thank you.
Je remercie la...
I thank the representative of Armenia for her comments. Iraq now has the floor.
جزيلا السيد الرئيس وتقدم.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to congratulate France on its presidency of the Council this month. We appreciate your efforts in convening this session. I also welcome His Excellency the Foreign Minister of France, and we thank the Secretary General for his presence and for the statement he delivered, and in which he highlighted the situation in the region and in the Palestinian territories specifically. Mr. President, the Middle East is going through a critical situation with an escalation in conflicts and in hotspots. This has negatively reflected on the security and stability of the region as a whole. The situation has worsened owing to the ongoing armed conflicts, the deterioration in the humanitarian situation, and the lack of comprehensive peaceful solutions. These challenges threaten today the basic rights of peoples and undermine chances of development and stability. Hence, the urgent need to double our efforts to address the root causes of crises by respecting international law and the principles of the UN Charter, and by giving primacy to dialogue and peaceful settlements over military choices. We are today at a historical crossroads. The current situation places us before two choices. Either we all collectively assume our responsibilities with seriousness and commitment, or we leave the region to sink further in the cycle of violence and destruction. Iraq, out of its belief in the role of the UN, calls upon the Security Council to shoulder its full responsibilities in maintaining international peace and security, and to adopt effective binding resolutions that would end the humanitarian plight by adopting decisive measures to end aggressions and violations, and to support efforts aiming at peacefully settling conflicts in a way that would protect civilians and maintain the dignity of the peoples of the region and restore hope. At the same time, we reaffirm that working for peace is not an option. It is a moral obligation and a collective responsibility that falls on the international community as a whole. Mr. President, the Palestinian question is at the heart of the crisis in the region. Today, there is an urgent need to find lasting solutions. The frequency of the Israeli aggressions against the Palestinian people has increased since the 7th of October 2023. The military operations led to the martyrdom of more than 50,000 Palestinians, mostly women, children, and defenseless civilians. It also led to forced displacement, to the destruction of the infrastructure, to targeting humanitarian organizations and humanitarian workers, including UN personnel. I seize this opportunity to express our deep appreciation of the UN personnel and their humanitarian ongoing field efforts, despite the challenges and aggressions against them. These practices constitute a blatant violation of international law and of the rules of the international humanitarian law. What we see today is tragic by any standard. These humanitarian tragedies are intertwined with political complications. The Holy Land has been turned into a stage for an unspeakable tragedy owing to the criminal acts perpetrated by the Israeli occupation forces. From this rostrum, we call on the Security Council to fully shoulder its responsibilities without delay and to adopt immediate dissuasive measures that would end the aggressions and lead to an immediate ceasefire, to lifting the blockade and delivering humanitarian assistance without hindrances, and to rebuild what was destroyed by the Israeli war machinery, to guarantee the safe return of the Palestinian displaced. Silence before these crimes and violations is unacceptable. Mr. President, Iraq reaffirms its steadfast position in supporting the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to establishing its independent state on all its territories with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. Iraq expresses its full solidarity with brotherly Lebanon. We condemn the ongoing Israeli violations of Lebanon's sovereignty and stability. We call for the respect of relevant Security Council resolutions and protecting the role of UNIFIL in Lebanon, ensuring their safety and condemning any attacks against them. Iraq reaffirms its support to the efforts aiming at promoting Lebanon's stability and territorial unity, and we support the people of Lebanon to overcome the current challenges. We also strongly denounce the illegal acquisition by the Israeli occupation forces of the buffer zone with the Syrian Arab Republic. This behavior represents a grave violation of international law and of international resolutions. We reaffirm the need to preserve the unity of Syria and its sovereignty and to support the rights of the Syrian people to decide their future without foreign interference. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Iraqi government, as part of its commitments, has been providing humanitarian assistance and basic needs to the Palestinian people to meet the challenges and to alleviate their humanitarian plight in the current circumstances. We have also been supporting UNRWA to enable it to discharge its mandate. We have also provided humanitarian assistance to the Lebanese and Syrian peoples to address their challenges and to express our solidarity with them in this stage that calls for uniting our efforts and collective responsibility to achieve stability and peace. Thank you.
I thank Iraq for his comments. I now give the floor to Chile. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd like to thank you for convening this debate, and I congratulate you on the way you have conducted the presidency over the past month. We take note of the statement made by the Minister of France, Jean-Noël Barrot, and we are grateful to the Secretary General for his statements. Chile endorses the statement made by Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. During the last 18 months from the reprehensible attacks by Hamas against Israel on the 7th of October 2023 to what followed, I thank Iraq for his comments. I now give the floor to Chile. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd like to thank you for convening this debate, and I congratulate you on the way you have conducted the presidency over the past month. We take note of the statement made by the Minister of France, Jean-Noël Barrot, and we are grateful to the Secretary General for his statements. Chile endorses the statement made by Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. During the last 18 months from the reprehensible attacks by Hamas against Israel on the 7th of October 2023 to what followed, namely Israel's indiscriminate response against the civilian population, our country has insisted on the need to put an end to the conflict and to the suffering of civilians in the Gaza Strip. Many of them have been forced to leave their homes seeking safety. Chile has called for and continues to call for the immediate release of all hostages and the cessation of attacks against the civilian population. We welcome the good offices by mediators in an effort to find a viable solution. Mr. President, High Commissioner Volker Turk reported to this Council that since Israel has resumed its military operations in Gaza, more than 1,900 people have lost their lives, that totals at least 51,000 who have died since the war began. Our solidarity is with all the families who have lost their loved ones in this conflict. ASG for Humanitarian Affairs Joyce Misuya stated that in 2024 was the deadliest year for humanitarian workers. More than 400 of them have fallen in the line of duty in Gaza. We call for investigations into these serious events, and those who are responsible must be held accountable before competent judicial courts. Chile reiterates its support for the work of all humanitarian staff, including the invaluable work done by UNRWA, mandated by this body to carry out its important mission. We are concerned about the impact of the blockade against humanitarian aid in Gaza. It puts at risk the lives of Palestinian people, particularly children, women, and older persons. We recall that IHL calls upon all parties in the conflict to ensure that affected populations receive life-saving humanitarian aid so that they can live in adequate material conditions, and the safety of humanitarian workers must be guaranteed. Our country notes with concern acts of violence in the occupied West Bank, as well as references to plans for territorial expansion. We recall Resolution 2735, adopted by this Council in 2024, which establishes that the Palestinian territory cannot be the target for demographic change. Mr. President, these months have made it clear that an end to the conflict depends on prioritizing diplomatic means aimed at applying the two-state solution. And I would quote the Secretary General in this Council, "This is not a time for box ticking. Time is running out." End quote. We must seriously consider the implementation of the two-state solution. We are now at the point of no return. It is time to prioritize peace and human dignity for a future of justice and security for all. Thank you, President. I thank the Permanent Representative of Chile for her statement. The Permanent Representative of Mexico has the floor. Mr. President, Mexico deeply regrets the break in the ceasefire in Gaza and repeated heartbreaking scenes of destruction and death, particularly the deaths of girls and boys. The international community cannot remain indifferent, nor should it dehumanize the figures of displaced persons, the wounded, and the dead. These people, in essence, represent the suffering of the civilian population, the violation of human rights, and the violation of the principles of the UN Charter, as well as the inability of the multilateral system to address the scourge of war. Recent direct attacks against UN and medical staff are proof of a dizzying and alarming backsliding in terms of international humanitarian law. Mexico supports any initiative which will contribute to peace and accountability, and we join in the efforts of the Global Alliance to implement the two-state solution, the Gaza reconstruction plan promoted by Egypt and the Arab League, as well as the holding of an international conference for the implementation of the two-state solution, to be chaired by France and Saudi Arabia under the auspices of the United Nations next June. As an initial step, this Security Council must be unwavering in calling for a permanent and immediate ceasefire, as it has done recently for conflicts in other regions. Beyond political considerations, our priority must be to save the lives of Palestinian and Israeli civilians and to ensure the release of all hostages. To solidify a two-state solution for Palestine and Israel, it is imperative to prevent the forced displacement of the Palestinian civilian population. Israel must also immediately cease further settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory. Similarly, the urgent reconstruction of Gaza must be promoted. We must not lose sight of the fact that the two-state solution must guarantee security for Israel and security for a Palestinian state in accordance with relevant UN resolutions. Beyond the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, Mexico expresses its concern at the escalation of violence in Syria. This Council must remain mindful of possible power vacuums resulting from the withdrawal of troops from Syrian territory. The exacerbation of regional instability, without a doubt, would compromise the process for political transition and the restoration of sovereignty for this country, and it would further impact the humanitarian situation. At the same time, Mexico underscores the need to put an end to reciprocal attacks between Israel and Houthis linked to recent bombings on the Yemeni coast. They have worsened the spiral of violence and the critical humanitarian situation for more than 18 million people in Yemen. Reducing tensions in the region and ensuring the freedom of navigation in the Red Sea is essential to ensure free and safe trade. Mr. President, I would conclude by reiterating the need for international law to be respected, particularly international humanitarian law. Today, more than ever, all efforts must be undertaken aimed at the establishment of lasting peace in the region. Thank you. I thank the permanent representative of Mexico for his statement, and I now have 20 remaining speakers on the list. Once again, I remind you that the speakers are asked to limit their statements to 3 minutes, please. The permanent representative of Romania has the floor.
President, I will go straight to my few points. Romania remains, just as previous speakers, concerned about continued escalation in Gaza and the breakdown of the ceasefire and hostage release agreement. We join others in calling for an immediate return to a ceasefire and the resumption of negotiations in compliance with international humanitarian law. My government supports the implementation of the delayed second phase of the ceasefire agreement in Gaza, with emphasis on the immediate release of all hostages, the protection of civilians, and the resumption of humanitarian assistance. All efforts must be made to guarantee a sustained flow of aid for the Palestinian civilians, and we regret that more than a month passed since it has been halted. Romania, together with its European partners, has undergone efforts to match its international humanitarian law commitments and has lent its support by treating 32 Palestinian children in Romanian hospitals. We reiterate that the only sustainable and viable solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the implementation of the two-state solution in accordance with the international law and relevant UN resolutions, including this body. It is in this context that we welcome the upcoming conference on the two-state solution, co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia this June. Romania fully supports the consolidation and empowering of the Palestinian Authority, including its reform agenda, so that in the future it will be able to govern over both West Bank and the Gaza Strip. We have constantly reiterated that the only legitimate representative of the Palestinian people is the Palestinian Authority, and we constantly stressed our support for the Palestinian Authority. And this is something that we would like to see reflected in the outcome of the conference in June. My delegation welcomes the joint initiative of the Arab states in shaping the path for the reconstruction of Gaza and in support of a broader regional solution. We need also to be aware that any steps toward the implementation of the plan will follow the spirit of the two-state solution, which means indeed that Israel's agreement and cooperation is necessary. Mr. President, the region of the Middle East features other areas that require our attention. On Syria, we heard the foreign minister earlier in both the General Assembly and this meeting. Our expectations regarding the implementation of a peaceful and inclusive political transition that preserves pluralism and the rights of all Syrians are very well known. We encourage and support the Syrian authorities to pursue this path following the National Dialogue Conference, the adoption of the Constitutional Declaration, and the appointment of the new Syrian government. These are prerequisites for a unified, sovereign, stable, inclusive Syria, and this country needs more than ever to rebuild trust among its communities. One last point, Mr. President, is on Lebanon and UNIFIL. Romania supports the integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. We follow and support the new government's objectives to address the country's socio-economic situation and restore the trust of the Lebanese people in the state's institutions. We also hope that proper conditions will be ensured for holding first the municipal elections and later next year the parliamentary elections. To conclude, Mr. President, while there are many challenges in the Middle East, there are some opportunities for a more predictable security landscape. And as we celebrate 80 years of the UN Charter, it should be a reminder that our political will can make the difference. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant permanent de la Roumanie.
I thank the permanent representative of Romania for his statement. I give the floor to the permanent representative of Vietnam.
Mr. President, I wish to thank you and the French presidency for convening this important open debate. I also extend my appreciation to the Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his insightful briefing yesterday. Vietnam aligns itself with a statement delivered by Uganda on behalf of Non-Aligned Movement. Mr. President, Vietnam expresses deep disappointment over the collapse of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The consequential resurgence of hostilities in both Gaza and the West Bank has further intensified civilian suffering and exacerbated casualties and displacement. We are gravely concerned by the disheartening and worsening conditions faced by more than 2 million Palestinians in Gaza as a consequence of deliberate measures aimed at blockading aid and obstructing humanitarian efforts on the ground. Particularly alarming are the recent attacks on civilian objects and United Nations facilities, resulting in the tragic loss of innocent lives, including children, humanitarian personnel, and UN staff. Such actions represent serious violations of international humanitarian law and are unacceptable. Vietnam calls on all parties concerned to uphold their obligations under international law and the UN Charter, fully respect all relevant resolutions of the Security Council and the General Assembly, and comply with relevant provisional measures ordered by the International Court of Justice. We stress the urgent need to ensure the rapid, unimpeded, and uninterrupted delivery of humanitarian aid throughout the entire territory of Gaza and the West Bank. Vietnam reaffirms its unwavering support for and appreciation of the indispensable role played by UNRWA in providing essential services and life-saving support to the Palestinians in distress. Vietnam remains supportive of all diplomatic efforts aimed at securing an enforceable ceasefire in Gaza and unconditional release of all remaining hostages, which is essential to ending the cycle of civilian casualties and suffering. Ultimately, a durable, just, and peaceful resolution to the conflict in Gaza and the broader Middle East peace process must be based on the two-state solution, in line with international law and relevant UN resolutions. In this regard, Vietnam welcomes the informal consultations to prepare for the upcoming high-level conference on the implementation of UN resolutions concerning the question of Palestine and the two-state solution, to be co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia in June this year. We also stand ready to contribute to discussions on Gaza's post-conflict reconstruction and governance, including efforts to mobilize necessary financial and technical resources. Finally, Mr. President, Vietnam calls upon all Council members to work together in good faith and unity to put an end to the prolonged conflicts in Gaza and elsewhere in the Middle East, thereby fulfilling the Council's primary responsibility of maintaining international peace and security. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant permanent.
I thank the representative of Vietnam for the statement and now give the floor to Poland.
Mr. President, the situation in the Middle East calls for decisive action. Firstly, civilian protection in Gaza must be prioritized under the international humanitarian law. So should be the unconditional release of Hamas-held Israeli hostages. Restarting negotiations to restore the ceasefire in Gaza is crucial. At the same time, the parties to the conflict must take urgent steps to ease the humanitarian crisis. We take note of the fact that for the more than 50 days, all supplies have been blocked from entering Gaza by Israeli authorities, driving the worst humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip since October 2023. These sufferings must end. We call upon Israeli authorities to immediately stop attacks on humanitarian workers and infrastructure. Mr. President, we are deeply concerned about the policy of hindering the UNRWA's operations. All UN member states must uphold UNRWA's mandate. Poland considers UNRWA as one of the key partners in delivering humanitarian aid in the region and regularly provides financial contributions to the agency. We continue to support UNRWA also this year with a contribution over $1 million. Mr. President, for Poland it is beyond doubt that there is no way to end the conflict other than by recognizing and respecting the right of both nations to self-determination. We express this by supporting the UN General Assembly's resolution on May 10, 2024, to upgrade Palestinian status in the United Nations. Voting for the resolution was consistent with our position of recognition of the Palestinian Declaration of Independence in 1988. Today, we commend Egypt and Qatar for their diplomatic efforts and urge all parties to resolve their differences through dialogue. A sustainable roadmap for the two-state solution is essential for achieving lasting peace in the region. We thank France and Saudi Arabia for their efforts to enhance global support for the two-state solution. We intend to take part in the June's conference in New York. Mr. President, Poland is committed to the de-escalation in the Middle East and the Gulf, recognizing that support for non-state actors fuels instability. We also condemn Iran's transfer of weaponry to Russia, which poses a threat to European security. Lastly, let me briefly turn to Syria. In rebuilding Syria, we must support the Syrian-led political process that respects the people's wishes and follows international law. Protecting human rights, including those of women and minorities, is critical for a stable future. And I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le
I thank the representative of Poland for that statement and now give the floor to Cuba.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, we support the statement by Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement and the statement to be made by the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the UN Charter and Senegal as chair of the Committee for the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. We firmly condemn the ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people perpetrated by Israel, which has the political, military, and financial support of the United States. In addition to supporting the war machine of the occupying power, it guarantees complicit protection with its veto in the Security Council. Israel has killed more than 51,200 Palestinians in Gaza. Of them, more than 35% of them are children. And by the 18th of March 2025, with the break in the ceasefire, more than 1,700 people, including 500 children, have died. Israel continues to shell and to destroy civilian infrastructure systematically in flagrant violation of IHL. The attacks against the only functioning hospital in Gaza and the blockade of the delivery of humanitarian for the past 2 months are war crimes which cannot go unpunished. Every minute of inaction will only increase the suffering of the civilian population and lead to the loss of human lives. We call for an end to this situation, and international protection must be needed by the Palestinian people. High officials of the UN bodies and agencies have recently emitted a joint communique saying that there is complete contempt for the loss of human life. We must urgently resume the ceasefire, and despite calls by the international community to end the apartheid, the genocide, and war crimes against the Palestinian people, the death toll continues to rise, and the Israeli settlement policy continues, and it is expanding settlements in East Jerusalem and elsewhere. We cannot allow this constant repression to intensify with the threat of expanding to new territories. The paralysis in the Security Council because of the continued veto by the United States is an affront. We call for concrete action from this body to put an end to the genocide in Gaza and allow for the entry of humanitarian aid without any restriction for the Palestinian people, and the vital work of UNRWA must continue. There must be an end put to Israel's illegal practices and occupation throughout the OPT and occupied Arab territories, as well as all aggressions against sovereign nations in the Middle East. Without further delay, Palestine must be allowed into the United Nations as a full-fledged member, and there must be a two-state solution so that the Palestinian people can exercise their inalienable right to self-determination and to be an independent and sovereign state with the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as capital. And it should also be guaranteed the right of return for refugees. A broad, just and lasting solution to the Palestinian issue is essential for regional peace. We hope that the holding of this international high-level conference on the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution will lead to a two-state solution ultimately. In addition to the situation in Palestine, Israel continues to violate the territories of two sovereign states, both Syria and Lebanon, and the United States continues to carry out acts of aggression as well in neighboring countries. There are alarming situations for peace in the Middle East, and at the global level, we call on the Security Council to act without delay and not to be indifferent to this injustice. We will be judged by history. The case of Palestine and sister nations will always have the firm support of Cuba. Thank you.
I thank Cuba for that statement and now give the floor to Malaysia.
Mr. President, at the last debate in January, we were heartened that a ceasefire was attained in Gaza, providing reprieve to civilians enduring untold suffering. It saw the re-entry of humanitarian aid and the return of Palestinians to their destroyed homes. Unfortunately, this positive development was short. On 18th March, Israel decided to resume its siege on the Palestinian people in Gaza, abrogating the delicate ceasefire facilitated by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. It returned to blocking humanitarian assistance and forcibly displacing Palestinians from their homes. Worse, it executed first responders and tried to portray them as terrorists. The Israeli leadership is blatantly instrumentalizing the plight of the hostages for political ends and for advancing its nefarious plans of annexing Palestinian land. Such action is abhorrent. While the ceasefire was in place in Gaza, Israel resorted to exacerbate the dire situation in the West Bank. Illegal settlements have mushroomed, while swaths of Palestinian land have been appropriated as Israeli state land. Settlers receive full protection from Israeli forces as they terrorize Palestinians. It is imperative that the aggression in Gaza and the expropriation of land in the West Bank by Israel be brought to an immediate end. A restoration of the ceasefire in Gaza and implementation of the second and third phases of the agreement must be accomplished without delay. We call on the Security Council to support the Arab OIC Recovery and Reconstruction Plan, which would supplement the three phases ceasefire agreement and lay the much-needed political horizon. It is a feasible plan that has been supported by many. Additionally, the high-level international conference for the peaceful resolution of the question of Palestine and the implementation of this two-state solution in June this year is an opportune moment to chart a clear and irreversible path towards ending the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory and a sovereign Palestinian state. We count on the Security Council's support towards this process, particularly in ensuring compliance with the outcome to be adopted. We continue to deplore the systematic attacks against UNRWA. We regret the cessation of funding to the agency by several donors. It is important that UNRWA continues to be supported in the discharge of its mandate until empowered Palestinian institutions are able to assume the indispensable services provided by the agency and a just solution to the question of Palestinian refugees as outlined in General Assembly Resolution 194 is attained. In conclusion, we reiterate our utmost hope that the 80th anniversary of the United Nations this year will finally bring about a lasting solution to the long-standing conflict. We call on all parties to muster the political will to ensure that international law is upheld and the inalienable right to self-determination of the Palestinian people is supported to bring about lasting peace and security to the region. I thank you.
Je remercie le
I thank the representative of Malaysia for that statement and now give the floor to Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to congratulate France on presiding over the Council during this month. I thank you for organizing this important ministerial event, which convenes at a very critical juncture. We appreciate your efforts during your presidency. I also thank His Excellency the Secretary General for his valuable briefing. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, what we have heard today clearly reveals the magnitude of the humanitarian catastrophic plight of the Palestinians and the Gaza Strip. The situation there is not a mere humanitarian crisis. It is an ongoing catastrophe threatening the life of millions of defenseless civilians. Civilians are daily facing bombardments, blockade, starvation, and a lack of basic necessities of life, including food, water, electricity, and medical care. This continued crisis for more than a year is a clear evidence to the failure of the Security Council to end these violations and guarantee the minimal basic rights to the Palestinian people. Blockade, the systemic violence, and preventing the delivery of basic humanitarian assistance, including food, medicine, and drinking water, is exacerbating the suffering of the Palestinian people. It is unacceptable in any way to use starvation as a weapon of war or as a tool to put pressure and to punish the innocent. We cannot remain silent about this situation. Therefore, we call upon the Council to shoulder its responsibilities and to intervene seriously to end this catastrophe. Mr. President, the ongoing violations in the Gaza Strip are the direct result of the lack of accountability and the non-implementation of Security Council resolutions that we all assume that are binding. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia strongly condemns the practices of the Israeli occupation authorities of collective punishment against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. The Kingdom also condemns the targeting by the Israeli occupation forces and their destruction of a warehouse of the Saudi Center for Culture and Heritage in the Morag area east of Rafah. The warehouse included medical supplies to meet the needs of the sick and injured in the Gaza Strip. The Kingdom also condemns all the Israeli practices aiming at forcibly displacing the Palestinians. The Kingdom also condemns and strongly denounces the repeated aggressions by the Israeli occupation forces against Syrian territories. We strongly reject the attempts by the Israeli occupation forces to threaten the security and stability of Syria by violating international laws. We call upon the international community to stand firmly and seriously against these ongoing violations in Syria and the region. We also call for galvanizing regional and international efforts to put an end to these violations, to guarantee the respect for the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria, and to lifting the unjustified economic sanctions that undermine the interests of the Syrian people. Mr. President, Israel continues to challenge international law and to disregard all international resolutions, including Resolution 2735, which calls for an immediate ceasefire and for the return of the Palestinian civilians to their homes to unhindered humanitarian assistance. Instead of complying with these resolutions, Israel continues to impose collective punishment to prevent the delivery of assistance and to impose restrictions on the Palestinian people, as if the resolutions of this Council were only dead letter for Israel. This council was created to maintain international peace and security, but it is standing idly today while grave violations are being perpetrated in full view of the world. The Kingdom reiterates its calls to the Security Council to take immediate measures to guarantee the flow of aid to the Gaza Strip immediately without conditions. We also reiterate our calls to promote international accountability mechanisms for these grave violations. This Council cannot be a judge that issues rulings without having the mandate to implement them. Otherwise, it will lose its credibility, knowing that the Council is the highest authority responsible for international peace and security. My country supports the plan of Egypt to reconstruct the Gaza Strip without displacing its people. We reaffirm our rejection to any prejudice to the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, whether through settlement policies or by annexing Palestinian land land or by attempting to displace the Palestinians from their land. We reaffirm the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination on their territories and to establishing their independent state along the borders of 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. Mr. President, the Kingdom reaffirms its full support to UNRWA. UNRWA is the lifeline for vital humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian refugees in the sectors of health, education, relief, and social services. We reaffirm that there is no alternative to UNRWA in this fundamental right. We call for providing UNRWA with the sustainable political and financial support to enable it to carry out its operations without obstacles. We thank UNRWA for its effort in providing assistance despite the harsh conditions and the growing challenges in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli entity, through its irresponsible usual practices, has caused the killing of several of the UNRWA personnel, and many UNRWA buildings were also destroyed, which further complicated the work of UNRWA, hence the need to provide an immediate international support to UNRWA to enable it to continue its vital work. In conclusion, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the Kingdom reaffirms the importance of international efforts to implement relevant UN resolutions on the two-state solution. We welcome the convening of the International High-Level Conference on the 17th of June, pursuant to the GA resolution and other relevant resolutions with the co-presidency of France. The Kingdom expresses its appreciation to the strong and supporting positions that were reaffirmed during the preparatory meeting on the 9th of April. The Kingdom, in this context, calls upon all countries to adopt practical measures to help achieve the goals of the conference, including end the aggression, recognize the State of Palestine, support the establishment of the Palestinian Authority on Palestinian territories, achieve Palestinian independence, and to thwart the annexation and displacement plans. Thank you.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Saudi Arabia for that statement. I give the floor to the Representative of Venezuela. Thank you very much, Mr. President. In the interest of time, I will make a shorter version of the statement agreed upon by the Group of Friends in Defense of the UN Charter. President, our group places a great deal of importance on the Palestinian question, and we regret that this situation remains at a stalemate while the conditions of millions of people and the tragedy they are living every day on the ground continues to deteriorate. In this context, we renew our most serious concern over the catastrophic consequences, including in the humanitarian field, resulting from the ongoing brutal Israeli military operation and the crimes committed to date by the occupying power against the Palestinian people, particularly in the Gaza Strip, which has claimed the lives of thousands of innocent civilians, the majority of them women and children. And therefore, we cannot but stress once again the importance of urgently achieving an immediate, unconditional, permanent, and fully respected ceasefire in both Gaza and other areas under attack by the occupying power, as well as ensuring the full observance and compliance with international law, including IHL and relevant United Nations resolutions and agreements, confident that this will create the conditions that are needed today on the ground to facilitate the work of humanitarian actors in providing rapid and unhindered support and assistance to those in desperate need in a consistent and safe manner at scale, which is certainly critical for saving lives, particularly in the Gaza Strip, which has been under a complete humanitarian blockade for over 50 days now. We reiterate our full support for UNRWA in implementing its mandate. Mr. President, we emphasize the importance of the full and effective implementation of the ceasefire agreement previously reached. We call once again for a permanent end to hostilities, for the release of all hostages and detainees, for the withdrawal of Israeli occupying forces from Gaza, and for the start of a major reconstruction plan for Gaza, with international support swiftly mobilized based on the State of Palestine's plan. We underline that this should also result in the release of thousands of other Palestinians that for years have been held captive in Israeli prisons and detention centers, It is therefore of utmost importance to advance in all of these fields in order to preserve a political horizon that can ultimately lead us to the comprehensive end to this protracted and disastrous conflict. This brings us to reiterating the importance of ensuring that the resolutions of this body on the question of Palestine are both fully respected and implemented. This, needless to say, is critical for breaking the current status quo, which has only emboldened the occupying power to continue with total impunity in contempt of this body and international law, while at the same time it continues to perpetrate its decades-long policies of colonization, apartheid, and extermination against the Palestinian people. Mr. President, we express our serious concern at the continued attempts of the occupying power to ignite and explode the Middle East region. Once again, we call on those who have any influence to demand that Israel cease and desist from its aggressive policies and plans to expand the conflict and generate a spillover effect, mindful of the potential devastating consequences for the well-being of entire peoples and for peace, stability, and security of the entire region and beyond. Hence the importance of redoubling international efforts to effectively and immediately advance towards a much-needed process of accountability for all war crimes committed by Israel, the occupying power, against the people of Palestine, Lebanon, and other nationalities, in which it is hoped all relevant mechanisms of international justice are expected to play a responsible role. In this regard, we reiterate our appeal to the international community to take effective and concrete actions to compel the occupying power to adhere to international law, including through the continued denunciation of the prevailing double standards and selectivity in the application of the UN Charter and international law. Mr. President, we also call on responsible members of the international community to take urgent actions and to adopt decisively all necessary measures aimed at preventing the systematic attempts aimed at undermining, including by force and by resorting to illegal settlers, the territorial integrity and viability of the Palestinian states. In this regard, we condemn all unilateral and unlawful Israeli steps aimed at creating facts on the ground, including, inter alia, through the building of settlements, the demolition and confiscation of Palestinian properties, the forced displacement of the Palestinian people, and the pursuit of plans on formal annexation of Palestinian territory in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Mr. President, we conclude by stressing once again the need to work together decisively to ensure that we can, once and for all, put an end to the illegal Israeli occupation. Once and for all, we must ensure the independence of the Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Once and for all, we must realize the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. And once and for all, we must achieve a just, comprehensive, and lasting solution to the question of Palestine in all its aspects, in accordance with international law, relevant UN resolutions, and the UN Charter, and on the basis of the two-state solution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant du Venezuela de son intervention.
I thank Venezuela for that intervention and now give the floor to Bahrain.
أود بداية أن أرحب بترأس معالي السيد.
Allow me to begin by congratulating His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the French Republic, on holding this important meeting. I also would like to thank the French delegation for its continued efforts during its presidency of the Council. I also thank Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, for his briefing. Mr. President, achieving just and lasting peace in the Middle East region requires political solutions and diplomatic efforts to end all conflicts and guarantee the interests and gains of the peoples of the region. We also need to find a solution to the Palestinian issue based on the two-state solution in accordance with resolutions, international resolutions, and the Arab Peace Initiative. This would address the demands of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, thereby maintaining regional security and stability. We emphasize the importance of continued regional and international efforts to promote the two-state solution and to mobilize necessary support for the peace process in the Middle East, especially in light of the latest developments in the occupied Palestinian territories. The current situation in Gaza requires us to return to the ceasefire agreement and implement all of its stages to end the war, to bring about de-escalation and the release of all prisoners and detainees, as well as to accelerate the delivery of humanitarian and relief aid throughout the territory. We underscored the importance of the humanitarian role played by the United Nations and its bodies and agencies to ensure the delivery of humanitarian aid to civilians, as well as the key role played by UNRWA in this area. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain reaffirms what was declared by the 33rd Arab Summit, which we hosted last year, which called for a just and lasting peace in the region. We remain committed to the peace process to ensure the Palestinian people can fully enjoy their historical rights and legitimate rights to self-determination, as well as the establishment of their independent state based on the two-state solution. We reject any attempts at displacement or colonization or settlement. We also commend the efforts of Egypt, especially its reconstruction plan, which was approved by the Emergency Arab Summit that took place in Cairo in March, as well as by the OIC. In closing, the Security Council and the international community must fully shoulder their responsibilities and intensify their efforts to guarantee peace and security on the international level. We must remain committed to upholding humanitarian and universal values in accordance with the UN Charter and international law, while preserving the progress made by the peoples of the region and guaranteeing their prosperity. Thank you.
Intervention.
I thank Bahrain for that intervention, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Belgium.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Respect for international law, including human rights law and IHL, is cornerstone of peace and security. Humanitarian assistance is not something to be negotiated, and therefore 60 days where the arrival of humanitarian aid in Gaza has been blocked, as well as the adoption of measures forcing humanitarian actors to end their activities and attacks on humanitarian operations and workers. All of that must cease immediately. IHL must be respected in all circumstances by all parties. The same is true for the basic humanitarian principles of impartiality, neutrality, independence, and humanity. In terms of these principles, we call on the Israeli government to allow humanitarian aid through as requested by the ICJ in its provisional measures of January 2024. We call for an end to violations of international law. Aid must not be weaponized in this conflict. Mr. President, we must work together to maintain the international legal system which we have created without prioritizing one geographical context over another. Selectivity weakens the rules-based international order with the UN as its pillar, and this could have a potential negative impact on other conflicts or create new ones. Mr. President, we call on the terrorists who are holding hostages since the 7th of October 2023 to release them immediately as requested for many months by the international community and the General Assembly. This should not be a competition in suffering. Humanitarian assistance in Gaza and the release of hostages are not mutually exclusive. On the contrary, the security of Israel and the security of Palestine are not mutually exclusive either. Belgium is among the many partners of Israel and the Palestinian Authority ready to support efforts in this regard. Belgium joins all others from all corners denouncing extremists on both sides. Mr. President, colleagues, the steps for a way out of the crisis are well known. The first involves a lasting ceasefire, the release of hostages, and the resumption of humanitarian aid. The second is the political process and the achievement of the two-state solution, as well as the peaceful settlement of the Palestinian question. And this, in turn, could lead to greater regional integration. It calls for good faith on both sides. Most of the partners of Israel and the Palestinian Authority are prepared to support this achievement. As was recalled recently by the European Union, financial commitment for support, as well as the participants in the Arab Summit on the 4th of March. I thank the Permanent Representative of Belgium for that statement. The Permanent Representative of Kyrgyzstan has the floor.
President, at the outset, we commend the French presidency for convening today's open debate on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question, a matter of urgent global concern. We also appreciate the recent discussions held under the French presidency focusing on this critical region. The Kyrgyz delegation extends a warm welcome to His Excellency Mr. Jean-Noël Barrot, Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France, as well as to the other distinguished high-level speakers who have traveled from their respective capitals to attend the Council meeting. We also extend our gratitude for the comprehensive information provided by Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres on the situation in the region and particularly on the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. Excellencies, the Kyrgyz Republic strongly advocates for a consolidated efforts by the international community, particularly the UN Security Council, to achieve an immediate and comprehensive cessation of hostilities in Gaza. We underscore the urgent need to address the humanitarian crisis in the region and to continue initiating a political dialogue aimed at a peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in line with relevant UN resolutions and the principle of the two-state solution. We call on all parties to adhere to the principles and norms of international humanitarian law, ensuring the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure, and the unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid. The Kyrgyz Republic firmly supports the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, the establishment of their own sovereign state, and full membership in the United Nations. The international community must intensify collective efforts to end the bloodshed in Gaza, prevent further loss of innocent lives, and prevent a humanitarian catastrophe. We urge all stakeholders to act responsibly, maintain constructive engagement, and continue working to ease the suffering of the Palestinian people and stabilize the region. We commend the efforts of Egypt, Qatar, and United States in facilitating the January ceasefire in Gaza and express hope that it will lead to a second phase of ceasefire and ultimately to a just and lasting peace. We welcome the upcoming high-level international conference of Palestine in accordance with UNGA Emergency Special Session Resolution 10/24. We also acknowledge and support the initiatives of Saudi Arabia and Norway in advancing their two-state solution through the Global Alliance. Kyrgyzstan endorses all international initiatives aimed at the reconstruction and further sustainable development of Gaza. We reaffirm the strong position of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in support of a just, durable, and peaceful resolution in Palestine, including the right of self-determination and the establishment of the independent state of Palestine. Beyond the Palestinian issue, Kyrgyzstan supports a political and diplomatic approach to resolving all conflicts, including in Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. It is essential that the transitional process in Syria proceeds peacefully and inclusively, reflecting the aspirations of its citizens. Likewise, the Kyrgyz Republic supports the stability, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Yemen and Lebanon. We believe that through joint international efforts, particularly within the framework of the UN Security Council, a peaceful resolution of these conflicts can be achieved. Our priorities in the region include the protection of human rights, ensuring humanitarian safety, protecting civilian infrastructure, including the healthcare system, and preventing the widespread displacement. We respect the principles of non-interference in internal affairs and the sovereign will of the people. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, we call upon the international community and in particular the Security Council to fully assume its responsibility in addressing the root causes of prolonged conflict and to work decisively to end cycles of violence. The Kyrgyz Republic reaffirms its unwavering support for all efforts, particularly the efforts of the Security Council aimed at achieving a just, comprehensive, and durable peace in the Middle East. In this regard, we underscore the urgent need for the Security Council to adapt to the evolving realities of our time. Kyrgyzstan supports ongoing reform initiatives aimed at improving the Council's working methods and expanding its membership to ensure fair and balanced regional representation. Recognizing a more inclusive and representative council is essential for effectively addressing the complex challenges of the 21st century. I thank you for your kind attention.
Je vous remercie.
I thank the permanent representative of Kyrgyzstan for her statement. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Iceland.
Merci, Mr. President. As we meet here today, Gaza is a place of death and destruction, with everything reduced to ruins. The population of 2 million is desperate, hungry, and has been repeatedly displaced. The short-lived ceasefire in Gaza brought cautious hope and provided an opportunity to bring in urgently needed humanitarian aid. Several hostages were finally freed. During the ceasefire, we saw how aid can and should be delivered to those in need. In the almost 2 months since it ended, the delivery of aid has been brought to a complete stop again. The situation is unbearable, unacceptable, and has been stripped of any sense of humanity. The Gaza Strip likely facing its worst humanitarian crisis ever. Meanwhile, the West Bank has experienced the heaviest military infiltration by Israeli troops for over 20 years. This has resulted in 40,000 Palestinians being displaced within the West Bank. Settler violence continues to be emboldened by radicalism and state-sanctioned impunity. We commend Egypt, Qatar, the US, and other actors who continue to push for peace and are working hard on securing another ceasefire. Any such plan requires leaders on both sides of the conflict to rise above their own self-preserving interests for the benefit of the peoples. Mr. President, Iceland reiterates its call for the immediate and unhindered humanitarian access in line with international humanitarian law. All hostages still in captivity should be released immediately and unconditionally. International law must be respected by all parties. It is incomprehensible how the basic principles of international humanitarian law can be so blatantly broken, including Israel's repeated and deliberate targeting of humanitarian workers. Furthermore, we agree with Secretary General Guterres when he warned in February that in search for solutions to the conflict, it is vital to stay true to the bedrock of international law, and importantly, it is essential to avoid any form of ethnic cleansing. Iceland has repeatedly voiced its concern over the Israeli legislation against UNRWA, including actions against UN premises in East Jerusalem. We have been clear, Israel as an occupying power has a legal obligation to ensure the well-being of civilians under its occupation. This includes securing the continuation of education, health, and other services, should the law be fully implemented and UNRWA's operation terminated. Mr. President, there is no other way out than a hard stop to the indiscriminate violence, terrorism, and occupation. No way out of this vicious, self-destructive spiral for either Israelis or Palestinians except through a sustainable two-state peace plan. We appreciate the work of the coalition for the implementation of the two-state solution. We look forward to the upcoming high-level conference on the two-state solution to be held in June. The international community must refocus its attention on the issue if there is to be hope for a peaceful resolution, as must the two sides to the conflict. The people of Palestine and Israel deserve living in peace and security side by side in sovereign states, mutually recognized by each other and us all. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Iceland for her statement. We have about 10 speakers left on the list, and with only 10 minutes left, with SCAD's authorization, we go a bit beyond 1 p.m., but I would insist that you keep your statements brief. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of the UAE.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'd first like to express our appreciation to His Excellency John Noel Barrow for opening this session, and we thank Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, for his important statement. A few days ago, Mr. Jonathan Wettol, the OCHA head of office in the occupied Palestinian territories, made a statement to the press, and he said repeatedly that we see and we know what is happening in the Gaza Strip and what the Palestinians are going through there in terms of suffocating suffering and a slow death. The United Arab Emirates strongly condemns the fact that Israel has prevented the world has enough reports and enough pictures and enough data to be well aware of the dangerous exacerbation of the situation in Gaza recently, especially including the disruption of the ceasefire and prevention of the entry of humanitarian aid, including food, medicine, and fuel, and the fact that the Israeli occupation forces have overtaken a large portion of the strip by establishing buffer zones and military corridors, and this has led to new and repeated waves of displacement, so that almost 65% of the Gaza Strip's territories are considered forbidden territory or are under forced eviction orders, or both. The UAE strongly condemns the fact that Israel has prevented the delivery of humanitarian aid for almost 2 months, the targeting of civilians, of civilian infrastructure, Israel's use of disproportionate violence in a clear violation of international humanitarian law. We reiterate the need to protect and respect humanitarian workers at all times. We call for a complete and a full investigation, and we call for holding accountable those who are responsible for the death of 15 humanitarian workers in Rafah. We also demand the holding accountable all those who perpetrate breach violations. We demand the unhindered entry and delivery of humanitarian aid, and we call for the return of Palestinians to their land, to which they have no other. What we lack is not awareness of the gravity of the matter, rather the political will to take firm measures to put an end to this war and to break this cycle of violence and to achieve a sustainable peace that the peoples of the region would enjoy and benefit from. This includes expanding a political horizon that enjoys credibility and ensures the two-state solution by putting an end to the illegal practices in the occupied Palestinian territories and putting an end to the occupation. We will have an important opportunity to support this track, and this is embodied in the high-level international conference to support the implementation of a two-state solution, due to be held in New York in June with a joint chairmanship by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and France. We stress the importance of this conference coming out with tangible outcomes. As long as the plight of the Palestinian refugees continues, the role of the UNRWA remains indispensable and vital. We renew our rejection of any attempt to affect and to undermine the agency's ability to carry out its mandate, including, most recently, an order to close UNRWA schools in East Jerusalem. We condemn the ongoing escalation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, especially the increased threats against the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the continued incitement by organizations of Israeli settlers that demand the destruction of Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. We also condemn the violations that were perpetrated against Christians in Jerusalem. This comes added to the repeated raids by extremists under the protection of Israeli forces, which threatens the legal and historic status of holy shrines in the city of Jerusalem. Here we stress the need to respect the role of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan in its guardianship of the holy sites and the Islamic Waqf within the historical context and of the city, and we reiterate our rejection of any attempt to change its demographic and legal status. In closing, Mr. President, the United Arab Emirates will continue to support all regional and international efforts aimed at pushing forth the peace process in the Middle East and in realizing the aspirations of the Palestinian people and the peoples of the region, aspirations to live in dignity and security and stability. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of the UAE for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kolisek, Chair of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People.
Thank you, Mr. President. The ceasefire in Gaza offered hope after months of devastation. The decision by Israel, the occupying power, to violate the ceasefire on March 18th, however, plunged Gaza back into chaos, erasing the modest gains that were made and worsening the already catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Israel's punitive blockade, which prevents all humanitarian access to Gaza, has caused acute shortages of various essential supplies, and we condemn the resumed Israeli military strikes across Gaza, which have made the entire territory unsafe. This Israel's renewed evacuation orders are effectively forced displacements. Since March 18th, 21 such orders have forced tens of thousands to flee once again into overcrowded and dangerous areas without basic services. This raises serious concerns about a forcible transfer of the population, a breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention. The committee reminds that under international humanitarian law, Israel, as the occupying power, must ensure the provision of supplies and relief to populations under its control. Resolutions 2730 and 2417 of the Security Council condemn the unlawful denial of humanitarian aid. Israel must comply forthwith. Israel's aggression has also intensified in the West Bank, with their widespread violations and military operations that have displaced tens of thousands of people. We lament the lack of activity due to the illegal bans imposed by Israel and the loss of UNRWA's vital services. This mandate remains in force until a just solution for the Palestinian refugees is realized, including the right of return. The committee continues to condemn the disproportionate and unrelenting use of force by Israel in violation of international law, including of the Charter as well as international humanitarian law and human rights law. We reject any proposals that aim to displace Palestinians from Gaza under the guise of so-called voluntary migration or redevelopment, including the outrageous suggestion of transforming the Gaza Strip into a Riviera to entrench this unlawful occupation. These proposals are inhumane and illegal. The committee welcomes preparations for the June International Conference on the Implementation of UN resolutions on the question of Palestine and the two-state solution, co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia, in a follow-up to G resolutions. And we call on the Council to further its intended outcome, including the self-determination and independence of the Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital in accordance with UN resolutions and international law. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Koli Sek for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Bangladesh.
Mr. President, we thank the French presidency for convening this quarterly open debate. Mr. President, Bangladesh is deeply concerned about the Israeli occupying forces' continued mass killing and gross violations of human rights in the Gaza Strip. More than 52,000 Palestinians have been killed in the last 18 months since the beginning of mindless attack on the Palestinian territory. Mr. President, Israel has continuously been showing no regard to repeated international appeals and has instead engaged in an increasingly intense killing spree. Bangladesh appeals to the international community, particularly the UN, to discharge its moral and legal responsibilities by adopting immediate and effective steps towards the implementation of unconditional ceasefire and the cessation of all hostilities for the protection of lives of civilians. We demand that Israel immediately cease all military operations, exercise maximum restraint, and abide by its duty under international humanitarian law. We emphasize strengthening UNRWA, which is the lifeline for Palestinian people, and call for ensuring the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Mr. President, Bangladesh will continue with its advocacy for establishing an independent, viable, and sovereign state of Palestine based on pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, which we firmly believe is the only sustainable solution to the crisis in the Middle East. We urge the Council to take immediate actions to recommend the admission of Palestine as a full member of the United Nations. Bangladesh remains steadfast and unequivocal in its call on the global community to work towards a two-state solution of the Palestinian issue based on international law, United Nations resolutions, and the Palestinian aspirations for peace, dignity, and justice. To this end, we welcome the convening of the high-level international conference in June this year. Mr. President, Bangladesh strongly believes that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of any state is inviolable. We reiterate our condemnation of the recent Israeli aggression in Lebanon and call for the sustainability of the ceasefire. Israel must also end its illegal occupation in Syria. Mr. President, we once again in this Council urge all to stop all forms of armed hostilities and violent repression against the Palestinian people and other nations in the Middle East. I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante du Bangladesh.
I thank Bangladesh for that statement and now give the floor to Brunei Darussalam.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. At the outset, I would like to congratulate France on its presidency of the Security Council for this month. I would also like to thank the Secretary General for the briefing provided. Brunei Darussalam aligns itself with the statements delivered on behalf of the OIC and NAM, respectively. Mr. President, Brunei has long supported the Palestinian people in the rightful pursuit of peace, freedom, and self-determination. The situation in the Middle East remains deeply concerning. The ongoing aggression by the occupying power in Gaza and the other occupied Palestinian territories continues to inflict unimaginable suffering on innocent civilians. None have been spared, not women or children, nor even aid workers, medical personnel, or journalists. Brunei would like to pay our respects to the UN humanitarian workers that have died in the past year and a half, and we strongly condemn the attacks by the occupying power that have caused hundreds of unjustifiable deaths and injuries of innocent lives. These brutal acts of violence and of collective punishment committed by the occupying power are a blatant violation of the ceasefire agreement and exemplify the occupying power's persistent disregard for international law, international humanitarian law, the UN Charter, and resolutions adopted by this very Council. Mr. President, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza has reached catastrophic levels, exacerbated by the total blockade since early March on humanitarian aid and the denial of basic necessities such as electricity and water. Stopping the supply of food, medicine, and services to a people under occupation is a weaponization of those very needs as tools of war. This dire situation not only threatens the lives of millions, but also undermines broader efforts to achieve lasting peace and stability in the region. Brunei reiterates its strong condemnation and rejection of any proposal or action aimed at the forced displacement of the Palestinian people. These actions aim at changing the geographical and demographic landscape of Palestine and clearly constitute a blatant violation of international law and UN resolutions. We would also like to underscore the importance of respecting and preserving the sanctity of holy sites and places of worship in Palestine. As a city that holds profound religious and historical significance for different faiths worldwide, the status quo of Jerusalem must be maintained. The altering of their historical, legal, or cultural character is unacceptable as it threatens coexistence and mutual respect. Any act to restrict access, raise tensions, or incite violence among communities exacerbates instability and hinder efforts toward achieving a just and lasting peace. Today, it is mosques like the Al-Aqsa and churches like St. Porphyrius. Tomorrow, it will be temples or the Wailing Wall. Mr. President, we call upon the Security Council to fulfill its responsibility and take decisive action to protect the rights of the Palestinian people. It is imperative to ensure the occupying power is held fully accountable for its actions and immediately halt all acts of aggression. Brunei Darussalam is steadfast in its commitment to the two-state solution based on pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as the capital of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine. We stand resolute in our solidarity with the Palestinian people and will continue to support all efforts aimed at achieving their inalienable rights to self-determination, peace, and freedom. I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante permanente de Brunei.
I thank the representative of Brunei Darussalam for that statement and now give the floor to Cameroon.
Thank you, President. I deliver this statement on behalf of the OIC group. Mr. President, permit me to express our due appreciation to you for convening this meeting and for the comprehensive briefing just provided to the Security Council on the catastrophic situation in Gaza and the entirety of the occupied Palestinian territory due to the ongoing illegal Israeli occupation and its violation of international law, including grave breach of amounting to war crimes. Notwithstanding the 5th session of meeting recently held by the Council within the span of 1 month, Mr. President, the catastrophic humanitarian condition in Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territory continue to deteriorate, inflicting immeasurable trauma and suffering on the Palestinian people. Israel military attacks continue to kill and injure scores of civilians, mainly children and women, and to wantonly destroy homes, hospitals, and shelters. And the population of Gaza continue to be deprived of all essentials of life, with all humanitarian assistance deliberately and punitively blocked by Israel. This is in spite of the express provision of the Security Council Resolution 2735, which provides, among other issues, for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and an unhindered flow of humanitarian relief assistance to the besieged Palestinian people in Gaza, and in spite of Israel's obligation as the occupying power under international humanitarian law. As the Council meets once again, the heavy tolls of casualty among the civilian population of Gaza has continued to rise, numbering above 51,937 and more than 16 persons injured, thousands of them disabled for life. And this devastating situation is compounded by the continued target attacks by the Israel occupation forces on UNRWA schools and tent encampment sheltering the displaced, medical centers, and on humanitarian and medical personnel and journalists. Among the most egregious incidents in the recent period was the massacre of UNRWA clinic, which resulted in the death of 19 Palestinians, including 6 children, and the assassination of Palestinian Red Cross Society medics, civil defense rescue workers, and the United Nations staff members in Rafah, in a Gelstorm attack that has further exposed the depravity of the Israel occupying power force. Equally distressing was the reported bombing of the Dar es Al-Qam school, sheltering displaced persons, and the destruction of medical warehouse owned by the Saudi Cultural and Heritage Center in Rafah, all in flagrant violation of the international law and relevant UN resolution. Mr. President, in the face of ongoing attempt by the Israeli occupying power to unlawfully and violently displace Palestinians in Gaza under the pretext of voluntary migration, the OIC group expressed its absolute rejection of this illegal policy, which amounts to nothing but the forced expulsion of Palestinian people from their ancestral homeland. This strategy of the Israel occupying power is equally evident in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, where the latest and most massive ethnic cleansing campaign since 1967 is taking place through the wanton destruction of refugee camps and prevention of the return of refugee families to their homes. Thus, this constant campaign of dispossession, displacement, and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians has been a central tool of its legal occupation for decades. It must be stopped. Within the context of a just and lasting solution to this crisis, the OIC group expressed its full support for the various démarches and effort of the United Nations and the international community, including to ensure the provision of life-saving humanitarian assistance to the desperate population in Gaza suffering under Israel genocide onslaught. Our group, Mr. President, further encourage and commends the effort of the government of Egypt, Qatar, and the United States to ensure that the ceasefire in Gaza, which entered into force in 19 January 2025, is restored, leading to the second phase of the ceasefire and eventually end of this disastrous war in Gaza. In the same vein, the OIC Group supports the ongoing global action in support of the implementation of relevant UN resolution on the two-state solution and the comprehensive, just and peaceful settlement of the Palestinian question. To this end, we welcome the convening of the high-level international conference on the of the implementation of the resolution pertaining to the question of Palestine and the two-state solution, in line with UN General Assembly Resolution AS 1024, and all relevant resolutions under the co-chairmanship of France and Saudi Arabia, and we welcome the strong and principled position affirmed in the recent consultation convened on 9th of April. The OIC will continue to actively participate in this important process, including through the mobilization of the Arab Islamic Ministerial Committee. Similarly, we commend the effort undertaken within the framework of the Global Alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution under the chairmanship of Norway and Saudi Arabia. In this connection, the OIC Group expressed its support to the Arab Islamic Plan for Early Recovery, Reconstruction and Development of Gaza, which was presented by the Arab Republic of Egypt in full coordination with the State of Palestine at the Arab Summit in Cairo on 4th of March 2025, and was adopted by the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and welcomed by the European Council. This reconstruction and rehabilitation plan, which is a necessary prelude to the restoration of essential service and human dignity to the Palestinian civilian population in Gaza, is a fundamental undertaking towards a peaceful settlement of the Palestinian question, helping to ensure that the Palestinian people remain on their territory and are not subject to any form of forced displacement or expulsion, whether from Gaza or the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The OIC Group, Mr. President, also expressed its support for the conference, which will be hosted in Cairo in this context. Furthermore, underscoring the imperative of ensuring unhindered access to life-saving assistance to the people of Gaza, the OIC Group reaffirmed its unequivocal rejection and firm opposition to all measures undertaken by Israel, including those of discriminatory and unlawful nature that seek to undermine the mandate, operation, and continued existence of the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestinian Refugees. We reject all attempts by Israel to circumvent or eliminate the rights of the Palestinian refugees, including their inalienable right of return, in contravention of international law and relevant United Nations resolution. In this regard, we recall the importance ICG advisory opinion process underway and the urgency of holding international law and safeguarding the presence and activity of the UN, including ORA and other international organizations and state in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, as they strive to uphold their obligation to assist the Palestinians. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, Mr. President, the OIC also reiterates its call upon all states to intensify their political, legal, and financial support to UNRWA so as to ensure the agency's ability to fulfill its General Assembly mandate and contribute to regional stability, as well as the pursuit of a just and lasting solution of the question of Palestine. The full text will be provided to be distributed as usual. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant permanent du Cameroun.
I thank Cameroon for that statement, and I now give the floor to the Maldives.
Thank you, President. My government wishes to thank Foreign Minister Jean Noel Barrett for convening this important and timely debate. The Maldives aligns with the statement delivered by Cameroon on behalf of the OIC. How many times will the debate on the question of Palestine before the Security Council takes effective action and exercise its mandate of maintaining international peace and security? It is a fact that Israel is an occupying power. It is a fact that they employ policies of aggression against Palestinians. It is the fact that this aggression is a threat not only to the peace and security of Palestinian people. Let us speak what is happening in Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territory as serious violation of international law, of common decency, and of the very principle of this council was found on to uphold. Gaza remains under an unlawful siege, hollowed out, its people buried under rubble, its laws cast aside, its future scored by fire. We must reconstitute the ceasefire in Gaza. There can be no peace without a ceasefire. An end to the hostilities and a ceasefire is a must for an independent and sovereign state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders. The International Court of Justice declaration and its advisory opinion stated that Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory, including the East Jerusalem and the construction of settlements in the occupied territories, are unlawful. It is an opinion that is law, and the law must be obeyed. Israel is not exempt from adherence to the law. All states, without exception, great powers and small, allies and adversaries, are bound by international law. This Council must now fulfill its responsibilities under the Charter. Resolution 2417 states that when starvation is used as a weapon, when humanitarian relief is blocked, this Council must act. There must be a comprehensive, immediate, and permanent ceasefire. Aid must flow, food, water, fuel, medication unhindered, and unconditional hostages must be released and civilians shielded. We welcome fully the support of upcoming United Nations Conference on Palestine in June and call on all member states to participate actively and contribute to forging a pathway towards a just and lasting peace for Palestinian people. We welcome the Arab League's proposal for a reconstruction framework and in the establishment of a transnational Palestinian administration. Such an initiative, properly structured and supported, offers a credible mechanism for restoring civil governance and rebuilding public institutions. In parallel, the Maldives considers that the question of deploying a United Nations peacekeeping presence merits serious considerations. On the matter of accountability, we reiterate our support for the International Court of Justice Court in its ongoing investigation into alleged violations committed in the course of this conflict. Its process must be impartial and its reach distorted by political experts. The Council stands at a fork in the road. One path leads to further delay, further loss, further shame. The other leads to renewal, to the restoration of law, of decency, and of peace. I thank you.
I thank the Maldives for that statement and now give the floor to Timor-Leste.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues. Timor-Leste congratulates France on assuming the presidency of the Security Council and thanks for convening this important debate. We are also grateful to the briefers for their valuable insights. Timor-Leste stands firm in solidarity with all peoples striving for peace, security, and self-determination. We are deeply moved by the plight of civilians who endure inhumane attacks and existential threats to their fundamental rights and survival. The Middle East's long-standing grievances and territorial disputes have generated cycles of violence that devastate communities and threatens international peace and security. Timor-Leste underscores the urgent need to address both immediate humanitarian crisis and the root causes of conflict. Regarding Palestine, Timor-Leste reaffirms its support for the 1948 UN resolutions. We envision Israel and Palestine living side by side as sovereign states within secure and internationally recognized borders, the only viable path to lasting peace consistent with international law. However, we are gravely concerned by developments that undermine this vision. We unequivocally condemn the actions of non-state actors who resort to violence and deny the legitimate rights of others. Extremism from any quarter must not be allowed to derail the hard-won progress toward peace. Timor-Leste calls for, first, an immediate cessation of hostilities and the protection of civilians. Second, the release of all hostages and prisoners of war. Third, unhindered humanitarian access to all affected areas. And fourth, renewed diplomatic engagement based on mutual recognition and respect. We welcome the high-level international conference co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France as a vital platform for renewed dialogue. In response to humanitarian catastrophe, we stress the urgent need for immediate delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance, protection of medical facilities, schools, and civilian infrastructure, and the unconditional release of all civilian hostages. Sustainable peace will only be possible by addressing the root causes of conflict and fostering genuine cooperation. Timor-Leste urges all parties to recognize and respect each other's legitimate rights and aspirations. The Security Council must support consistent enforcement of relevant UN resolutions, encourage credible peace initiatives, and ensure accountability for violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. The path forward demands courage, compromise, and commitment. Timor-Leste stands ready to support all genuine efforts toward a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace that guarantees self-determination, security, and dignity for both Israelis and Palestinians. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant Timor-Leste.
I thank Timor-Leste for that statement. There are no more speakers on the list. The meeting is adjourned.